Hey guys, it's Kevin again. So, if you've noticed on my channel in the last couple of years, amongst the very small amount of videos that you would get sporadically every single year, one of the things that has just kind of gone to the ether and really just hasn't been a constant on my channel is TV reviews. Where have they been? I haven't really been doing them much. I think 2021 was the last time I was like really consistent with it. I think the last one I did on this channel, aside from like the Christmas one I did last year, which I count, but like is still like a video on its own, was I think Stranger Things. I think was the last one I did. The last half of Stranger Things season 4. Other than that, I haven't done like any TV reviews on here, and so I've been trying to figure out the best way to go about it. Originally, I was going to do a video with my ex-girlfriend, and well, you guys can understand why that's not happening anymore. So because of that, I'm instead going to take this time to introduce you guys something that I really haven't talked about on this channel, and that is my Serialized account. Serialized is a great app out there. You can log TV shows. I'm not sponsored by them or anything. I'm not trying to do that, but I do think that Serialized is an app that a lot more people need to take advantage of. If you love Letterboxd, I think Serialized is a really great resource to use. You can find more TV shows. You can keep track of shows you're watching. As someone who watches a lot of shows, there are some shows like I forget that I started, and since using the app, I've had a much better way of keeping track of things. So what I'm going to do instead is we're going to go in the order that I ranked these on my Serialized list. I have a list of all the seasons of television that I watched. We're going to go ahead and rank them from 15 to 1, and I will go about it that way. I think this should be a lot of fun. I have quite a few shows to talk about, some of which I don't think many of you have seen, so I'm excited to kind of get the word out on those. Some of them that you haven't seen also have been canceled, so there's that. But either way, we're gonna go ahead and get started with number 15. All right, so coming in at number 15, we have a show that I think very few people really watch, and that is called Death and Other Details. This is on Hulu. Well, now Disney Plus. I don't know if Hulu is even a thing I should acknowledge anymore because it's basically Disney Plus. It's really complicated, but either way, I was excited for this one. I feel like we've had a really good surge of shows about mysteries and with like quirky characters trying to solve mysteries and things like that. Unfortunately, while I think there is stuff to like about this show, it really didn't do that much for me. I'll talk about the things I like right off the bat. Mandy Patinkin is fantastic here. This is exactly the kind of role that he sinks his teeth into. I feel like we don't get to see enough Mandy Patinkin these days, and this show just reminds us like how great of a talent he really is when he is fully utilized. I think the character he's playing here is a lot of fun. He does a good job of kind of channeling this detective that may not be as on top of things as people expect him to be. He is there's a scene very early on in the show where Rufus Colesworth is elected as like the best detective ever, and the show is kind of deconstructing it. And when we're focusing on his character, the show is really well done. The same applies to Violet Bean, who plays our main character of Imogen. Their relationship was easily the highlight of this entire show for me. I love the back and forth between these two. There's a lot of tension between the two of them because of a mystery that Rufus failed to solve years ago, and Imogen kind of harbors resentment towards him for that, and I thought that was a really interesting dynamic. It's not really something we've seen before. We have, two different storylines going on. One, I'll talk about the main murder in a little bit, but the side story involves Imogen's mother. Imogen's mother, there was something that happened in a car accident. I'm not going to get into exactly what happened, but it has not really been solved, or at least it seemed like it was solved, and maybe it wasn't. It seemed maybe a little too convenient, and, she's grown quite frustrated at that, and you see that there's a lot of tension between the two of them, and that's something that I really enjoyed watching throughout the show. I thought that the dynamic between these two is really well done. You really enjoy their whole dynamic in this show, and I think the two of them work really well together. They really anchor this show. Unfortunately, aside from them, the other characters here just didn't really do it all that much for me, and that is the one thing that does really bring the show down amongst a couple other things that I'll talk about. But the other characters here, I just didn't really feel like I latched onto all that much. Someone like Anna, who's Imogen's best friend, didn't really do much for me. There's a side story between her and like her wife, who's like always paranoid. Her wife as a character was far more interesting to me as Layla. She's always on high alert. She always is thinking about the worst possible circumstances, and I wanted more with her, but instead we're focusing on Anna, and the only reason we're really focusing on her is because the show's also trying to do this like eat the rich sort of story with like her incredibly spoiled and just really unlikable family, but that feels like such an afterthought in the show. It never feels like we're able to dive deep into that side of things, and so when the show starts to focus more on that, it just I was like, oh yeah, this is a thing. Like, I just didn't really care because I didn't really feel like the show built up to it all that well. It's like, this is like the family that Imogen's been forced into. She doesn't really feel connected to any of them. And I, as a result, didn't really feel connected to any of these characters. But some of the other characters we meet here, like Sunel, who is kind of Imogen's love interest, but then you also have Jules, who is also kind of a love interest for her. I didn't find either of these characters to be all that interesting. I like Raul Coley. I like him as an actor. He's been amazing in all the Mike Flanagan projects he's been doing, but this is very much not that. And so while I think he's good, he's a very charismatic actor, there just isn't really a lot for him to do in this show. He has some moments here and there, but overall didn't really do much for me. Linda Emond is really good here too. I did enjoy her performance in the show, but the things that really bring the show down for me, aside from the things that I mentioned, is that the main mystery here just really isn't all that interesting. In fact, I was honestly really losing interest in what was going on concerning the main mystery of the show. You don't really feel connected to the person that was murdered. You're not really getting enough information as to what's going on. The whole show is supposed to be focusing on like, the details of these characters and diving deep into stuff, but it feels kind of counterproductive when these characters, for the most part, aside from the two I mentioned of Rufus and Imogen, are so incredibly one note, and it never feels like we're able to dive as deep into them as we really need to. So that really was a problem for me. But the other big issue here is that this show just feels extremely derivative of better shows. I mean, first one that comes to mind is Only Murders in the Building. I think that's gonna be a show that people endlessly are comparing, shows like this to, just because like it's such a winning combination. You have these three great actors and there's a mystery going on, and it's always really fun to watch. I haven't loved every season of Only Murders. Eventually when season 4 comes out, I'll talk about seasons 2 and 3. But I mean, the one most consistent thing about the show is all three of those actors I think are just so great. And this show is trying to replicate the quirkiness of that, and it doesn't do a great job with it. White Lotus is also a show you're going to hear a lot of comparisons to when it comes to this one, and the reason, and even Knives Out, I would say, is a really good comparison here. I mean, Rufus Cotsworth, they are trying so badly to make him like a Benoit Blanc, and he's just not. Like, that's just not who he is. He doesn't have the he doesn't have the interesting layers that character has. He doesn't have, especially like the sassy type personality that character has. Like, he just doesn't really have it. And like I said, while I enjoy Mandy Patinkin in the role, he's not Benoit Blanc, and the show's trying to kind of make him that way, and it doesn't really work in that sense. Even the relation between him and Imogen, it feels eerily similar to what we saw between Benoit Blanc and Ana de Armas in Knives Out. The only difference is they're not really doing like a social, like these two have had a relationship beyond this case. They've always kind of had that connection. Like I said, Imogen doesn't really want much to do with him because the fact that he wasn't able to solve her case and things like that. I think that part of the show is really interesting, and that's the part that I really did find myself latching onto. Again, I think the real issue here is just how derivative so much of it does feel. I will say, though, the show does get better, like, as it goes along. Particularly the 6th and the penultimate episode of the show are really damn good. There are some big revelations that come out, and it feels like, okay, we're finally getting this moving. It finally seems like the show is starting to have more of a point. It finally feels like I'm getting an idea of what this is beyond a surface level, and right when it seems like everything's starting to come together, the finale happens. And I'm not going to spoil the finale too much, but I will say the show was canceled recently, and I'm not upset to see it go, because I kind of feel like they've ruined a lot of the potential of what they could be doing in this show within the finale. There's things happening too quickly. There are twists that just don't really make any sense. There are things that have been kind of put on the back burner that now are apparently a lot more important, and they just don't really go together. There are characters that are going in directions that don't feel earned at all, and it's just one of those kind of finales where it just feels like they had to rush something out really quick, and they weren't really able to put together the finale that they wanted to, and as a result, it just feels really rushed and messy, and yeah, so I was really disappointed in that, because like I said, I felt like the show had been doing a better job of starting to kind of showcase what it was going to be, give us more of an idea of what the show could turn out. I will say I never found myself like completely bored by this show. There were always things to like, and again, it's because I like the two characters of Imogen and Rufus. I think those two characters are good. I enjoy the backstory of what Imogen was going through. I really enjoy the flashbacks in the show. I think those were very effective. But even by the end of the show, I mean, the resolution we get to that, I thought was also like deeply unsatisfying. So yeah, overall, I just really wasn't big on this. I really wanted to like this a lot, and I really did think it was going to pick up and we were going to have a really strong finale, but the finale really just reconfirmed like what wasn't reaffirmed what wasn't working in the show for me, and honestly made it that much more noticeable. So yeah, overall, I can't really recommend this one. I think there's way better shows of its ilk out there. Only Murders in the Building, White Lotus, even The After Party I would suggest to watch. I think that's a really good one that not enough people talk about, and yes, that one was canceled as well, but like that one at least ends on a note where it's like there isn't this massive cliffhanger. This one does end on a note where like they very clearly set the show up for a season 2 and it's not going to happen, and I wasn't really interested in where it was going anyway, so it's fine. But yeah, Death and Other Details, not a really great show. I'd give this one a C+, not really worth watching. Very disappointing, because like I said, I think it had some really good ideas, but by the end it just didn't really come together for me. All right, so now we go on to number 14, and at 14, we have a show that was actually, I think, the first show I completed of this year, and that is Echo. Disney Plus. I haven't gotten to talk a lot about these Marvel Disney Plus shows, and I will say, for the most part, they're very hit and miss. There are some I like, and there are some I really don't like. Miss Marvel, Moon Knight, Loki, WandaVision, all of those are really good. Everything else, Hawkeye as well. I like Hawkeye a lot as well, but everything else, not so much. Everything else is not very good, and Echo, I thought, had the potential to be one of their better shows. The fact that this was going to be TVMA, they were connecting it to Daredevil. This was going to be the first major thing that really shows us, like, what is this side of the MCU going to be? Now that we know that Charlie Cox is coming back, he's going to be in the show. Vincent D'Onofrio is going to have a major role. What can the show really turn out to be? It looked like it was going to be a lot grittier. It was going to have those more sort of, that authenticity and that sort of grimy nature that I feel like we've been missing from these shows. A lot of them just feel very polished, and I feel like something like a Daredevil, it just had such a more like I said, just real sort of feel to it, and I was really hoping that would be the case with Echo, and overall, I did really enjoy this show. There are quite a few things that really do work about it. It's just not quite as great as I want it to be, and I'll get into why in a little bit, but the best thing about the show by far is Alaqua Cox's performance. I think she is just fantastic as this character. I really liked her in Hawkeye, but I think here she shows even more, how much of a range she has as this character, because it's very hard to take a character like Echo who had such a clear motivation in Hawkeye and was very much the villain of that show, and turn her instead into this sympathetic sort of anti-hero. But the show does some really great work to show us like what drove her to this point. Why was she so adamant about going after Hawkeye? I mean, yes, we know from the show. I think the show did a good job at redeeming her, but this show dives even deeper into that. And when we are centering on her inner conflict with her trying to figure out where she really is, does she want to be a hero? Does she want to be a villain? That is when the show is at its best, I think, is when we're really centering on that moral conflict within her, but also showing that motivation of why is she so adamant on going after the things that she is. I think they do a really good job with that. Her relationship with Kingpin as well, it's fleshed out a bit more here. You get a better understanding of what their relationship really has been, this very twisted dynamic between the two of them. I think they do a really good job with that. And I mean, Vincent D'Onofrio really just doesn't miss a beat in this show. He gets right back into this character, just like we saw in Hawkeye, but here it feels like this is way more of the Kingpin that we are used to, but also a different side of him. I mean, this is a Kingpin that is way more down on his luck. He is way more desperate. He's doing whatever he can to really reclaim the relationship with Maya that he used to have, and I think that is very interesting. He takes the character of, Fisk in a very interesting direction that I just really enjoyed seeing in the show. It really just shows how layered of a villain Fisk really is, especially when you take this. And I think, I see people say before that this doesn't feel like the same Kingpin as we saw in the Marvel Netflix shows. I think it's pretty clear this is a different Fisk in a different phase of his life. And I think we're going to see him eventually get to that place that he was in Daredevil. I think here he's just in a much different place, and I think the show, it works in that way. And I think that, again, D'Onofrio is just so good as this character. I thought he was very convincing in this role. Some other standouts for me: Devery Jacobs is really good as Bonnie. She is Maya's estranged cousin. She's really the person that brings out the best in her, and I really enjoyed her character a lot. She is very much trying to track her down. She's trying to do what she can to, see the good in her, try to get her to, try to get her to remember the past, because, Maya's kind of in this place where she doesn't really want anything to do with her hometown. She's been so far away from it for forever. They don't really mean all that much to her. There's so many things that have gone on without her, and, Bonnie's the one that's really trying to bring her back, trying to get her to open up more, and I thought that she was just really good in this show. I really like what they did with her, and for the first 3 episodes, I would say this show was very well paced. It was probably one of the better paced shows I've seen in the MCU. I thought they did a really good job at getting us to understand the story. It's more simplistic than I expect it to be. It really is just Maya is going back to her hometown. She's trying to, get vengeance for Kingpin, but also trying to reconnect with her family, even though it seems very hard for her to do that, while also kind of struggling with who she really is after the events of Hawkeye. That really is all it is, but it works really well. The 3rd episode in particular is very well done. It's this very intense, most of it takes place in this bowling alley. There's a very intense and kind of gritty sequence in a bowling alley that I thought was really well done, and that really is when the show is utilizing that TVMA rating. It never goes as far as you expect it to, but compared to other stuff we've seen in the MCU, certainly this is a lot more darker, and I thought they did a really good job with that. That's when I thought the show was at its best. The last 2 episodes, on the other hand, that's where I really start to have some issues with the show. I think the last 2 episodes here really just weren't as good as it started. I think that they had some good ideas in this show about, whether it be Maya's family roots and things like that, kind of connecting her to the people of kind of connecting her to, her community and things like that. I think the show does do a good job of diving into that, but it always feels very surface level. It never feels like we're able to dive enough into that side of things, and so that part of the show just feels very rushed, but especially when it comes to the character of Chilla, played by Tantu Cardinal. I mean, she's basically supposed to be like a co-lead of sorts in this show. Her character is as integral as Maya and Kingpin are, and it never really feels that way. And then suddenly, towards the end of the show, she is way more integral of a character. And similar to the majority of MCU Disney Plus shows, it never feels like we have earned this. It never feels like the show has really gotten there, rather than it needs to kind of get to this climax in a very rushed and hurried manner. And I mean, if you want to ask me right now, what is the most rushed finale in MCU Disney Plus history? It is undoubtedly Echoes. I mean, there's not really a ton that happens here that I can say was overall overall satisfying. There's a lot that happens that I'm honestly kind of struggling to even figure out what fully happened. It feels like they had this really great pace, and the show could have gone on for, I think, 5 more episodes, but unfortunately they cut it in half, and the last 2 episodes as a result just feel very rushed. Episode 4 is not as rushed as 5. We get a little bit more of Kingpin, we get more into their overall relation, but it never feels like we're able to dive as deep into things as we want to. And some of the other characters here just come across as kind of unnecessary. For example, her uncle in this show never feels like we get enough with the character of Henry. Same when it comes to Biscuits, his character, he's really just like the comedic relief in this show, and they never really do all that much with him. So yeah, there's a lot to like about this one. I really did enjoy a lot of the performances. I enjoyed what they did for Maya. I think this is a really good character arc for her, but unfortunately it's yet another example that's just kind of cut short. And especially for Kingpin, as a villain, as much as I enjoy him in this show, he is very underutilized here. He doesn't really come into the show until episode 4, and by then he's supposed to have this like crazy plan of sorts, and it feels like we haven't gotten enough time to really understand his motivation. So it just feels very one note, surprisingly one note. I mean, I saw people in Hawkeye say that his motivation felt one note. That motivation felt more understandable than his motivation here. I honestly don't really think they dived enough into what he was doing, so it just comes across as very generic and been there, done that. And what I liked about this show was how stripped back so much of it was. The first 3 episodes in particular are very stripped back, and then the last episode in particular, I mean, it really goes for those MCU type moments, and it just feels like it doesn't fit in this show. I think if the show had peppered those moments throughout the earlier episodes, I think it really would have worked. I generally think if this was a 10-episode season, I think this would have been a great show, but unfortunately, because of just how rushed those last 2 episodes are, and the fact we only have 5 episodes, it just never feels like we're able to tell the story to the fullest potential that the show wants us to. And like I said, when we're diving into Maya's culture and things like that, as great as it is to get the representation that we do on this show, again, it feels surface level. It doesn't feel like we're able to dive deep enough into this culture and why it's so important to Maya and things like that. It doesn't feel as satisfying as it should. Her connection to her family as well just doesn't feel as satisfying. So yeah, there are a lot of things to like about the show. I think it certainly isn't a bad show by any means. I think there's far worse Disney Plus shows out there, but as a whole, it definitely did leave me feeling just a bit underwhelmed. I really am happy that the new Daredevil show is going to be 18 episodes. At least I hope it's still going to be 18 episodes, because I think that's what these Disney Plus shows need. I've been saying it from the beginning. I think all they really need is to treat it like a TV show. Don't try to treat it like this was supposed to be a movie and try to cram, an entire movie into like 6 episodes of a show. It just doesn't really work that way. The structure feels off. It never feels like we're building towards anything. The first 3 episodes always feel like there's this nice pace to them, and then it kind of just like, flatlines towards the end. And I think that's really been like the main issue with these shows. And I think if they're able to take a more streamlined approach and recognize like, what are we doing differently in, with television versus movies, I think Loki really is the only show that has fully figured that out. That show had a clear direction from the beginning, and because of that, they were able to tell their story to their fullest potential. I would say, WandaVision's another good example of that. Miss Marvel had a really good finale, but other than that, I mean, that's really been the issue with these shows. And while this certainly isn't the worst example of it, it definitely is one of the most underwhelming finales that they have given us to date. So overall, while I did enjoy this one, it just didn't really live up to the expectation that I really wanted to. So B- for Echo. I think this is still a really decent watch. I think there's still a lot to really like about it, but overall, it still suffers from the same issues that have been plaguing the MCU in the past couple years. All right, so now we go to number 13, and at 13 we have a very polarizing show, I think, and that is the live-action adaptation of Avatar: The Last Airbender. And look, when this was announced initially, I didn't really know how to feel. Avatar: The Last Airbender, my relationship to it, it's not nearly as personal as some people. I definitely watched it as a kid, but I don't have the fond memories that other people did. I think I didn't watch every single episode. I tuned in like I watched every so often, but I don't think I ever really like sat down and watched through the entire show. But I will say right off the bat, this show makes me want to do that, and that is to this show's credit. Like, I think the show does a good job of honoring what works so well in that original show, and that's something I really did appreciate about this. But it also is able to, go a little bit deeper with some things here. For the character of Aang in particular, we dive a lot deeper into his backstory. What has he really left behind after being frozen when the Fire Nation ends up attacking? We actually get to see the moments leading up to that, and I thought it actually brought a lot of personal, it really brought a emotional core to his character. You understand why he is so conflicted throughout the show. On one hand, there are all these responsibilities that are mounted on him, but on the other hand, he just is missing his family and he wants to get back to them, and there's so many things, there's so much that he has lost, and I thought that was something the show did a really good job with. And I thought the first episode in particular, did a really good job of setting things up. As far as the performances in this show go, I think all of them are fantastic. I think everyone does do a really good job. Gordon Cormer is a very solid Aang. You really buy him as this character, someone who is this kid. He's very free-spirited, but he also doesn't fully understand what he's got himself into. What is his true destiny? What is he really, becoming? He doesn't fully understand all of that, and I think that he did a really good job of channeling that in the show. I really enjoyed him here. And then I thought Kaya Wentillo as Katara, I have not heard enough about her, but I thought she was very good here. I really enjoyed her in this show. I think that, you understand how she kind of is the most, I would say, level-headed out of the three. She's the one who really is trying to, she's dealing with her own personal tragedy, but she's also trying to help Aang on his journey, and I thought that she did a really good job. Ian Osley, other people have talked about him, definitely did take a bit for me to fully get into him as Sokka. He was the only one that just felt kind of one note to me. I didn't really know if I bought him as this character, but the more the show went on, the better I think his performance did become, and I thought by the end of the season, I really did buy him as the character. By far, though, the best performances in the show has to be of Dallas Liu as Zuko. I mean, he was just fantastic here. Like I said, I don't have a lot of memories of the original show, but Zuko I do remember being this very complex character. He has a lot of, past burdens that he is dealing with, and there's a lot that he is, similar to Aang, you see kind of mirrors in that way of like all these responsibilities that are mounted onto him, but yet he doesn't really know if that's what he wants to do. He's been told he needs to capture the Avatar, and he has a reason for doing that, but is that actually who he wants to be? Does he actually want to be this villain, or is there a different path for him? And I think this first season already is exploring that very well. The best episode of the show by far really dives into the relationship between Zuko and Uncle Iroh. I think they do a really good job of diving into that. I really enjoyed their whole dynamic in the show. You understand why that's so important, but you also get a sense of why is Zuko so important to Uncle Iroh? What is he really gaining from their overall relationship? I think they do a good job of diving into that in the show. I really enjoyed their whole dynamic here. I think that worked really well. Daniel Day Kim and Ken Lun are also pretty good here. The things that really work well about the show, I think, is these individual journeys for these characters. You get a sense of what's really at stake for all of them, what they're really fighting for. This season really does work as like a setup to what's to come, and I think they do a good job with that here. Whether it's seeing Aang and him kind of growing into his role as the Avatar, whether it's seeing Katara, her mourning her mother's death and how much that is taking effect on her, but also how much it's put a strain on her relationship with Sokka. I mean, you really get, they really do a good job of diving into that. Whether, like I said, it's Zuko and him being told what he's supposed to do, but also feeling kind of conflicted about the entire thing. I think they do a good job with that. Or Lord Asai and what his whole plan is. There's a lot of setup in the show, and it does do a really good job in getting us there. It's a lot of necessary backstory, and so I think there's enough here where, like, if you haven't seen the original show, I think there is enough here to keep you interested. I think there's enough here that's going to get you to be intrigued. I think there's enough here to where you can understand what's going on. You're not going to feel like, I don't feel like I'm getting enough here. And I think that's when the show does work really well. Like I said, I think the performances here are really good. The things that bring the show down, though, are a couple things. One, you can very obviously tell that though this is an 8-episode season with like 50 to 60 minutes, 50 to sometimes an hour long runtime, it still feels like this is very truncated from what the animated show was. They are trying to cram like 22 episodes into 8, and it does feel like at points there are multiple episodes crammed into one, and it just doesn't feel, the pacing just feels kind of off at points. Like like the first 20 minutes of an episode, you'll have these characters go to this one location, and then the next episode they're all split up and going in and then the next half of the episode they're all split up and going into their own directions. And I can watch it and think, okay, this would make sense in an animated show that is like 20 minutes because, you're able to have that, that first, if you split it into 2 parts, it works that way. But as one episode, it just feels a little bit too overstuffed at points. And I think when the show really kind of slows down and gets us to dive deeper into some of these elements, I think it works really well. Particularly, I think the episode, like I said, about Zuko's backstory, but also the finale, I think those 2 episodes are very well paced. It's everything in the middle that I'm not as sure about. I think there's just a lot of things here that just feel not rushed, not messy's not the right word. Again, it just feels kind of truncated, and it doesn't feel like we're able to get it feels like the show needs to just kind of slow down a bit. It is in such a rush to get to some really big events, and I think it just needed to kind of take its time to slow things down, and I think it would have been that much more effective overall. So that does hurt the show in some regards. There's some subplots here also that just don't really work for me. Like, there's a whole subplot with Sokka and this relationship he forms with Princess Yu, and I never really felt like I got a sense of their relationship. It didn't feel like we dived into it as much. It didn't feel like it was as fleshed out as it needed to be, and I was watching it and thinking, okay, this is probably way more fleshed out in the animated show. Here, it just feels like this is happening because it's supposed to happen. It doesn't feel earned in that way, and I think that was something that I just wanted to see a lot more of, and I think the show could have done more with that overall. But the other issue I have, and this might not be an issue for everybody, but I really just felt like the chemistry between these 3 actors are so great, and so much of what works in the show is the chemistry between Gordon Cormer, Kai Wen-teo, and Ian Osley. I think those 3 actors work really well together, but the show makes the decision for most of the season to split these 3 characters up, and so when we are seeing the friendship between the 3 of them, you just aren't as locked in. You're not as invested, just because it doesn't feel like we've seen enough of just these 3 interacting and seeing that friendship that is forming. We get a little bit more of that towards the back half of the season, but a lot of the season you have Katara and Sokka doing their thing while Aang is off, with that, finding the next airbender, or trying to find the next trying to find the next person to help him out and things like that. Like, there's various things that he is doing in this show, and they're all important. Like, I don't want to act like they're not. They're all very important stuff as he's meeting all these characters that are connected to his past and understanding the purpose of them in his whole quest. But it just feels like we don't get enough scenes of these 3 together. And I think that the show needed to do more with that. And I would have appreciated if they dive deeper and, if we really got more scenes of like the 3 of them interacting. I think that definitely does hurt the show in some aspects. There's also some moments here that just feel kind of forced. Like, there's a moment in the first episode where you have, I forgot, Gran, that's her name, Gran, and she's talking about, what Aang's whole, she's trying to give information about Aang and his whole backstory, and it is literally word for word the intro of the show, and it just feels so forced. Like, it feels like they're like, oh, you see what we're doing, oh my god, we're referencing the thing that you didn't think we were gonna reference, and we're gonna reference it, and it's like, okay, I get what you're doing, but like, stop. Like, that is something that definitely did bother me. Thankfully, it's not something that goes on for like the entire show, but for the first couple episodes, that was definitely a significant issue for me. Like I said, I do think the show grows into its own the more it goes on, and I do think it does find its own identity by the time, but I do think it does have a few things it needs to kind of work out in order to become become what it wants to be. It's always going to be in the shadow of the animated series. I don't think there's anything here that makes you want to watch this over the animated series. I think the only things that it does differently is, like I said, expanding some things about, these characters' backstories and things like that. But for all I know, maybe that was explored in another episode. I don't know. I haven't seen enough of the show to really judge that, so I don't feel like I can give a fair account of like what is new and what's not. I know from what I've heard, the Aang stuff is pretty new that I talked about, and I think seeing more of the relation between Zuko and Uncle Iroh, that's also pretty new, what they did there. But other things aren't as much, and I think that's the one, and that's the one thing that is going to hurt the show for people. If you are someone who is has religiously watched the show, and it's like one of the main things that like you're passionate about, and all the characters and all the lines, there's not going to be a lot you're going to get out of this. I feel like there's a lot that you're going to watch this and you're just going to think, okay, but this was better on the animated show. It's always going to pale in comparison in that way, and I think that's the one thing that does bring this down. But like I said, I think when the show is good, it is really good, and I think it does end up by the end of the season, it does grow into something that I generally am intrigued in seeing how it's going to play out from here. They already said it's probably only going to be like 3 seasons. They've renewed it, I believe, for seasons 2 and 3, so I'm excited to see how the rest of it goes. I probably will also watch the original Avatar show before season 2, so I can have just a little bit more, I can have just a little bit more knowledge of, what's new and what's not, and I can give you just a little bit, you can get a little bit more out of that side of things than you are right now, because I'm sure that's a question that a lot of people are asking. But overall, I did end up enjoying this. It wasn't quite on the level that I think people were hoping it would be. It's not like the One Piece series, which was fantastic as well. I haven't seen enough of that to really say, but I've heard people praise the One Piece series. I don't think this show had that same level of praise, but I think if you go into it knowing it's not going to be as good as the animated show, but still is something really good and still does have a lot to like about it, I think you will overall enjoy this one. So B- for Avatar season 1, Avatar: The Last Airbender. It's not a great show yet, but I think give it a few seasons, give it a few episodes. I think hopefully season 2, I think it really does grow into something special, and I'm excited to see what the show does end up becoming, in the coming seasons. All right, so now we go to number 12, and this is a show that I think just like went completely under the radar, and that is the new season of Feud, Capote versus the Swans. Yes, there's a new Feud season that finally came out after I don't know how many years. When was the last time? 2017 season 1 came out. Betty and Joan. Fantastic. One of the best things Ryan Murphy has ever done. Does a great job of exploring just the, power dynamics between the two of them, and how, just tragic that whole story is for both parties involved. I mean, just did a really great job with that in this show. And just knowing that there was another season coming out, I was really hyped. And no, this is not on the level of season 1, but it's still a pretty damn good season. I gotta say, there's a lot to really enjoy about this one that I think, again, it's a shame that I think the season's gonna go completely ignored. Like, I don't even know if it's gonna get like Emmy nominations and things like that. There might be some, and there definitely should be, in my opinion, which I'll get into, but like, I don't think this season has had the hype that season 1 did, which makes sense. It's not nearly as high profile as it once was, and Ryan Murphy is not where he was in 2017, admittedly, either, so it makes sense that it's not nearly on the level that it used to be. But like I said, I think this is still a really good season to keep track of. The way this season really dives into this whole story about Truman Capote. I think that honestly is kind of when the show is at its best, understanding just how complex of a character he really is. I mean, this is someone who, yes, he is, writing this whole sort of manifesto of sorts about the Swans and all the terrible things that they done and all the backstabbing, all of these terrible acts that they have committed, and him kind of trying to, piece together whether or not that's something he should be doing. But what I really like about the show is that it does take this level-headed approach, where at first it seems like, yeah, you're on the Swan side. Truman is scum. He's a terrible guy. He's done all these horrible things to them. They all used to be friends with him, and he betrayed them and things like that. But similar to season 1, it shows that it's not that black and white. There are some really terrible shit that the Swans have done, some of which is completely unforgivable, and they really haven't taken any sort of accountability for it, and it's gone completely unnoticed. And I think that part of the show is really interesting when we're kind of understanding just the moral implications of what all of them have done and how little action has been taken in, addressing these things and things like that. I mean, in the beginning of the show, there's something really tragic that ends up happening that just goes completely under the rug for so many of the Swans, and you understand, why that is the case and why Truman has stayed so silent throughout this entire thing. And I think that was a very interesting sort of approach to this show, because they could have easily portrayed Truman as just very one-note and cartoony. And for the first couple episodes, it seems like that's what he's going to be. But once we get into, I would say, the third episode, that's really when we start to get an understanding of, what this is really all about. What is the show really trying to do, and I think they do a really good job with that. Particularly the 5th episode of this show for me is honestly one of the best episodes of either of these seasons. I think they just it's called The Secret Inner Lives of Swans, and it's all about Truman kind of trying to contemplate whether or not he should actually make this article. Should he actually make this story? Is this something that he should end up doing? All these things that each of the Swans have done that he has seen from afar but hasn't really spoken about, and the guilt that he kind of feels, I think, was really well handled, and it went in a direction that I really wasn't expecting it to. But it's easily the best episode, I think, of this entire show, and I think the show is worth watching just for that episode alone. It's definitely I've seen some people been a bit divisive on it. I thought personally it worked really well. I loved how weird and psychedelic it got. I thought it worked really well, and it was this really interesting sort of character study for Truman, and I really liked that a lot. And then on the flip side of things, you have the character of Babe Paley, who, aside from Truman, is absolutely like the main focus of the show. And thank God for that, because Naomi Watts, as usual, is fantastic here. She's really sinking her teeth into this role. You understand that Babe had this great friendship with Truman. I mean, he was friends with all the Swans, but Babe is really the one we concentrate on, and you see how she really adds to the sadness of it all, because these two had a really strong sort of friendship. He helped her through a lot of tough times, same with him, and you really see how things kind of soured for them, and how it really hasn't been able to ever get back to how it was, but how desperately the two want to try to fix things. And Babe in the very beginning of the season ends up getting this like terminal diagnosis of sorts, and you kind of see how she transforms throughout the show, how she starts off wanting revenge and things like that, and then how she kind of becomes a lot more sort of sympathetic as the show goes on. I mean, I just thought they did a really good job with that. I think Watts is so good as this character, as usual. I mean, she's just such a fantastic actress, but this is definitely the kind of show that utilizes her to its fullest potential, and I think they do some really great work with her. The second to last episode in particular with her, I thought was just fantastic and really just showcased the range that Naomi Watts really had. I thought that she was just really fantastic in this show. That being said, it's definitely not a perfect show by any means. There are quite a few things that do bring this one down. One of them being is that while this show is called Capote versus the Swans, it might as well have been called Capote versus Babe, because aside from Babe, and to an extent Slim, like Diane Lane Lane is really good in the role. Slim is someone who is very cutthroat. She always has, like, you know, a plan of her own. She always wants to make sure things go down the way she wants it to. She is incredibly, you know, she's someone who is, you know, very chaotic in that way and things like that, and I enjoyed her character. The other swans in the show just don't feel like they have the depth that they really needed, and that wouldn't really be a problem if the show didn't try to, especially in the last episode, really get me to care for them and get me to latch onto them, and I didn't really. I just felt so disconnected from the majority of these characters. Callista Flockhart and Molly Ringwald in particular are almost completely wasted here. Molly Ringwald has some really good moments in, like, the last episode of the show, but, like, aside from that, there's really not much of anything for them to do. And then Chloe Sevigny's character of CZ Guest, there's a lot of directions that she goes in that I just thought were very unclear. And, like, I know obviously this is based on a true story and they need to get these characters from point A to point B, but they feel more like plot devices. They don't feel like full-fledged characters. They're just here because, well, we have the swans and we needed to have them. It just doesn't feel like they were given the depth that they really need. And if you go back to Betty and Joan, I mean, yes, Betty and Joan are so well fleshed out, but so was Alfred Molina's character, so was Stanley Tucci. I mean, even, I would say, Hedda Hopper had some really, you know, great moments, and they had so much depth to them. This show is very much lacking in that regard. I think that it's very much lacking in depth, and I think a big reason for that is because the show is very much presented in this non-linear structure. We're constantly hopping back and forth between time, and because of that, it's really hard to get a read on what's actually going on. You know, where are we at this point with these characters? What have they been up to? This thing that happened in this episode, has this happened yet? Or is this after? Was that of any consequence whatsoever? And so I found myself more kind of focused on that than I did on getting to really care about these characters. Because, like I said, aside from Babe and Truman, I just didn't feel like anyone else was as well fleshed out. There's some good moments with, like, for example, Babe's husband, Bill. Treat Williams is really good in the role, and he does have some good moments here and there. But other than that, I mean, I just don't think we got enough of the other swans in the show. And so when the show starts to dive, you know, tries to kind of give them this emotional payoff, I just didn't really care all that much, because the show was acting like these characters were you know, significant throughout the entire show, and they really weren't. We don't really get enough of them, and so I just didn't really feel like I cared all that much. The finale in particular was just very hollow for me. It focuses a lot, like I said, on those other swans, and I just didn't really care that much. So that's the one thing that really did bring this down. Jessica Lange, also very good here. I forgot to mention her. It's really great to see her and stuff. We don't see enough of her these days, but this show just reminds us, like, how well she can do. Even when she has, like, the smallest role, she makes such an impression on the show, and I thought that she was just fantastic here. Like I said, I think the things that work really well about the show are very effective. The friendship between Babe and Truman especially, it's really good stuff, really is the heart and soul of the series, and it adds this tragedy to the entire thing, where it's like, yes, Truman is trying to do the right thing in publishing, you know, this whole novel and things like that, but should he do it? You know, should he compromise his friendships with them? What is the impact of what this is going to do? Is that greater than his friendships? That's something else the show is really trying to dive into, but also for the Swan side of things, you know, you kind of see it as like Truman betrayed them and things like that, and again, I think that they needed to dive deeper into, like, why they feel the way they do. Chloe Sevigny's character, like I said, especially, a lot of decisions she makes just didn't really make a lot of sense to me, but overall, I really did enjoy this. I think it was very effective for what it was. It's certainly not on the level of Betty and Joan by any means whatsoever, but I think there's a lot to really enjoy about the show. I think there's a lot of great talent on display here. Tom Hollander, also just fucking phenomenal as Capote. His whole transformation into that character is so good here. He gives such a strong performance throughout the show, really just showing how multifaceted Capote really was, and all the different sort of, you know, facets of his personality I thought were so interesting to watch unravel here. Just a really good show overall. I really wish more people talked about it. So B for Capote versus this one. Certainly not on the level of Betty and Joan, but overall I did really enjoy this one. All right, so now we go to number 11, and number 11 here is a show called Fool Me Once. It was actually the first show that released of this year, and I will be honest, when the show started off, I wasn't really sure if it was going to be my thing. There was a lot of overacting, there was a lot of just melodrama and things like that. I just didn't really know if it was fully going to work for me, but after a few episodes, I actually ended up really enjoying the show. It starts off and it seems relatively straightforward. We have this character Maya, and she's trying to come to terms with her husband Joe, who's just been murdered. And, one day her young daughter is playing around. There's this nanny cam in her house, and she sees what she thinks is a nanny cam. She sees what she thinks is a image of her husband in her house in the flesh on the nanny cam. So it's all about what's going on here. How could this have happened? Did he fake his death? Is he actually alive? And then simultaneously, there is this other case of sorts that is going on, and we're trying to kind of, link the two together. And yeah, so it seems relatively straightforward at first, but what the show does do a really good job with is slowly revealing more information as things go on. It's a little bit more complicated than you really expect it to be. There's a lot more going on here, especially when we start to dive deeper into Claire Walker's murder and what that's really all about and how these two things come together. It actually does get really interesting. And the one constant of this entire show, I have to say, Michelle Keegan as Maya is just fantastic here. I mean, you really see her as this woman that is just at the end of her rope. She's willing to do whatever she can to get the answers that she needs. She is so adamant on trying to figure out what is going on, and as the show goes on and she grows more and more frustrated, I mean, her performance just becomes that much more impressive. You really just see the growing anger, but also the determination within her. With how little progress is, going on within the case. And I thought she was just fantastic here, particularly in the last couple episodes of the show. I thought she really stuck out, and I thought that she was just she gave a really strong performance overall. However, I would say the standout of this entire show, though, is Adil Akhtar, who plays the character of Sammy Kearse. He's the main detective overseeing everything. And for a while, one of my issues with this show was that I just didn't feel that these characters were all that interesting. There's a lot of things that they kind of are keeping on the back burner. Like Maya, we know, is ex-military, and there was something that happened while she was serving, and we're not entirely sure what it really was all about, what really ended up going down there. So they kind of keep those details hidden. And then with Kearse, there's this whole thing going on with him and this growing addiction of sorts that he has. And again, for a while, it's kind of just told to us in passing. It's not really something we dive that deep into. But later on in the show, we start to dive a lot heavier into his character. And he, by far, is the best character on the show. I found myself really connected to what was going on with him and what they were really trying to get at when it came to Kearse as a character. There is a reveal of sorts that happens towards the end of the show that I thought was very effective, and I thought it really made sense with what they were trying to do with him. I thought, okay, I actually like this, idea with this character, and I thought that it actually felt pretty fulfilling, and so that's something that I really was impressed by. But again, I think the writing in the show, they do a good job of just making this mystery that much more intriguing and really putting the pieces together in a way you're not expecting it to. And when it comes to the actual reveal of what happened, I mean, I was shocked. Generally, I was not expecting them to go in this direction, but yet it feels like they earned it. It didn't feel like it came out of nowhere. It's not like Death and Other Details where there's this huge twist and then the show barely does anything with it. No, it actually feels like they really did a lot with this twist. It actually does improve the show in a pretty huge way, and it becomes something a lot more personal when it comes to the reveal here and what it really meant for the show. The finale was maybe my favorite episode of the show, either that or episode 7. I think that were just really well done, and that's something that I really just appreciate, is that they didn't go in the predictable direction I expected them to. I thought, okay, this is definitely what's going on, but no, they actually did do something that generally took me by surprise, but it wasn't just in a sense where, okay, this was really subversive and different. It actually felt like it strengthened the show. It felt like it made the show a little bit more interesting. It had a little bit more underneath the surface than what we had been seeing up to that point. And I really enjoyed where they end up going. I think the ending of the show in particular was very emotional, and I really love the note they ended things on, and what this show ended up really being all about. I thought was, just very poignant in that way, and that's something I really just appreciated. I think the issues I have with the show is that, like I said, the first couple episodes, I didn't really know if this was going to be for me. I didn't really know if I love where it was going. It was feeling a bit generic. It was feeling like we weren't getting enough information. I think once we get to like the last 3 or 4 episodes, I think this really takes off and turns into something exciting from there. And the show has this like much more propulsive nature and like urgency to it that it didn't have prior, and it becomes that much more interesting to watch. It definitely is a show you can easily binge through, and I think that you're gonna find, you're gonna feel the need to want to do that. For me, at least, like I said, it just took a couple episodes for me to fully get into it. And there's some other characters here that I just felt like did not have nearly as much depth to them as they really needed. There's a lot of other side storylines going on that I just wasn't fully invested in, and I wish that they would have dived deeper into some of that. But overall, this was a much better show than I kind of expected to be. When it started off, I didn't really think this was going to be anything that great, but by the time it ended, I was pleasantly surprised by how much I did actually end up enjoying this by the end. I thought that it ended up turning into something far more effective than I thought it was going to be. So yeah, overall a B for Fool Me Once. It's nothing amazing, but I think considering what I thought the show was going to be, the way it turned out, I'm definitely was generally very impressed by, and not at all the show that I really was thinking it was going to be by the end. So very clearly it's the same day. Definitely am not shooting this over, 24 hours later or whatever, but regardless, we're going to get back into this. Talking about number 10. We're in the top 10 now. So yeah, very excited to talk about, all the shows we have. All the ones I've talked about aside from 15 are shows I've liked. These are the ones that I really recommend and really think you guys need to check out. But number 10 is a show that I really think needs no introduction. A lot of these are ones that I feel like just haven't gotten a lot of traction. This one, on the other hand, I think pretty much everyone has really been talking about since they heard it, and that is Has Been Hotel. Look, this is a show that is just right up my alley. The second I saw, the clip that was released in October, of this being, of Erica Henningsen from Mean Girls, her getting, Mean Girls the musical, her playing this role of Charlie, and that clip of Happy Day in Hell, I was like, this is gonna be one of my new, this is gonna be one of my new obsessions as a show. This is going to be a show that I am just constantly thinking about. This is going to be a show that I'm, one of my new favorites. And I will say it didn't quite reach that level, but there's a lot to really love about the show. I mean, the voice cast from top to bottom is just fantastic here. I think everyone does a really great job. Erica Henningsen, I think, is just perfectly cast in this role. She does such a great job at just playing these characters that just have this, they just radiate positivity. They have this can-do attitude to them, and that's exactly what Charlie is in this show. Even when things aren't going the way they should, she always wants to do what she can to, try to build this hotel, try to redeem all of these, seemingly irredeemable people, and try to bring out the best in them. And she's a very easy character to root for because of that. I really enjoyed seeing her throughout the show. I think she is just so incredibly likable, and I really enjoyed her in this role. So she's a really big standout here for me. Stephanie Beatrice, also really good. Blake Roman, though, is a huge standout here as Angel Dust. Oh my god, he is just fantastic in this show. Angel Dust is so incredibly raunchy and just so he you can see in the very beginning of the show, he's kind of just over this. He doesn't really want to be a part of this whole hotel and things like that. He's very sardonic in that way, but he also has a lot that he himself is dealing with. There's a lot of pain that character has been through, and Roman really just does a great job of channeling that. I think giving one of the strongest performances within the entire show. Keith David, as usual, as he is in everything, is fantastic here. I love the character of Husk so much. He is so great here. But I also got to talk about two other performances. Amir Talai, who plays Alistair. I mean, such a instantly iconic character that I think everyone's really going to get behind. But then there's Alex Brightman, who, always great in everything. Love seeing him show up in a show like this. Have been a big fan of him, whether it was School of Rock or Beetlejuice. So to see him be like the main villain in this show as Adam is fantastic, but also playing Sir Pentious, who's kind of the complete opposite. He's someone who himself has been told that he's supposed to be villainous and he's trying to redeem himself and things like that, and I thought he was just fantastic in this show. So great voice cast all around. The animation also is just absolutely stunning here. It's so colorful and vibrant. I love the different worlds that we venture to. The look of, the hotel and things like that, just the details and all that is so well done. When you contrast that with the look of the angels, I think they do a really good job with that here. That is a new addition to this show, because for those who don't know, I'm sure you do if you've looked into anything about this show, this was originally a show that was on YouTube. Vivian Madrino, or as she's called on YouTube, Vivzy Pop, she created this pilot on YouTube, and there were quite a few new additions, and the angels are one of them, and they work really well in this show, I think, as the antagonists here. They're very demonic looking. They are very much, and it's kind of ironic that they're called the angels, because they have this very, unsettling and just demented sort of look to them, and I think they do a really good job with that in this show, so I really enjoy the animation a lot here. The show also is very funny. I was laughing consistently. The musical numbers, banger after banger pretty much, whether it's the opening song, Happy Day in Hell, which just perfectly sets up what this show is going to be, whether it's, more stripped down songs, like, for example, whether it's more stripped down songs like this duet between Charlie and her father Lucifer. That more than anything, one of my favorites in the show for sure. But the two that I think are probably the best songs within this entire show. I'm sure you've heard about the song Loser Baby. It's such a fantastic duet between Angel Dust and Hux, as the two of them kind of get to understand each other in a way you're not really expecting them to, and I think their whole duet is just so well done here. But also this song Ready for This, which is kind of like this it's kind of like this anthem sort of hype song of Charlie trying to get everyone to fight against the angels once, and try to get them to fight against the angels once and for all, and kind of all uniting against them. It very much reminds you of like a Do You Hear the People Sing or something like that, mixed with kind of this Music Man type vibe to it. It's just fantastic. So many of the songs here are just so instantly catchy. They're impossible to really resist, and they're one of the best things about this entire show. So those are things that work really well. What doesn't work as well? Well, like I said, I think the characters here, for the most part, are really well developed, but I do think overall this show can feel incredibly rushed at points, and that's really where we get to my main issue with the show, is that I just think that this show, it just has a little bit too much going on for an 8-episode season. Almost every single episode of this show, we are meeting new characters or visiting new locations, and that wouldn't be a problem if, this was a show that was kind of episodic and we were, just kind of phasing in and out of storylines, but there is an overarching narrative going on in this show. The overarching narrative is that you have these angels who, Charlie's trying to convince them that, these people can be redeemed, but the angels see it as, no, we can't do that. There's this, purge of sorts that hell is always going through, where they end up killing all the sinners pretty much, and they're going to end up performing this task, much earlier than expected, and Charlie's trying to do what she can to stop it, and that part of the show, you just don't feel it as much. I didn't feel the overarching narrative as much as I should. Every couple episodes we check back into it, but you just don't feel the stakes as much as you really should, because the show is focusing on other characters that are interesting, but it just feels like the show kind of slows down. Like, we have an entire episode based around Charlie's father, Lucifer, and this is an important episode. I'm not trying to act like it isn't. It very much is, and there is genuine momentum there, because she's trying to get him to understand why this revolt needs to happen, why this hotel is so important to her, so there is definitely a motivation there. But then you have, episode 3, for example, we're focusing on an entirely new group of people that that we haven't met before with the like Celestials and things like that. And characters like that, I just feel we don't get enough of in this show. There are a lot of characters here that by the end just feel kind of shortchanged. It doesn't feel like we're able to get the depth that we really need out of them. And I really do attribute that to only having 8 episodes here. There are some things that are really well paced. Angel Dust as a character, I think, has a really solid arc this season, and also has the best episode this season in episode 4. I mean, we really get this much more darker look at Angel Dust and what he really has had to go through. You know, he is this pornographic actor of sorts, and the way they portray him in episode 4 is completely different than how they've been portraying him the rest of the season, and it really works because it gives us a much more in-depth look at him, and by the end of that episode, we are sympathizing a lot more with that character, understanding all of the hurdles that he's had to go through, all the abuse he's had to put up with. I think that is a very well done episode of television, and not to say the others aren't, but they don't pack the same emotional punch that that episode does. You know, characters like Vaggie, for example, I really do like in this show, but for a long time, Vaggie is really just Charlie's girlfriend who is trying to do all she can for her, and there isn't really a lot. And then there's a little bit more we find out about her, and I thought that was really intriguing. It added a very interesting layer to the show, but it's just not something the show explored enough. And I know obviously there's a season 2, but it felt like they made a really big deal out of this one thing, and I wish I could say more. I'm not going to get into because I don't want to spoil, you know, what goes on in the show for those that haven't seen it, but I really just wish they would have dived a bit deeper into that conflict, because I think it was a really intriguing idea, and they just didn't really do all that much with it. It felt like they kind of had to wrap it up as soon as it started. Serpentius is another character who is supposed to be very important within this season. I just didn't feel his arc throughout this show. There, you know, you're clearly supposed to feel like he is being changed as a character, and while there is some really good moments with him, he's another one that I just felt needed a lot more. A character like Alistair is really just not in this season enough. He appears every couple episodes, but there are points where he's not even there, and the arc that he's going down as a result is kind of confusing. I couldn't really tell what they were doing them until really the finale, and then I was like, okay, now I get what they're really trying to do with his character. But again, you see the issue here, like, because they only have 8 episodes, and all of them are like only like 25 minutes long, they're not really able to tell some of these stories to their fullest potential. Whereas I think if they had not just 13, like 16 episodes, like I think you could have easily done like a 16 episode season, divide this into 2 chunks. There is a easy point in episode 6 where you could do like an act break of sorts, and then have the second half of your season come out several months later. I know it didn't work. It hasn't worked for certain shows. Like I know Invincible season 2, it really didn't work for. A review of that coming very soon, by the way. But you know, I know for like that show it didn't really work, but I think it really would have benefited this show because we would have had more time to let these storylines play out, let these character dynamics breathe. It feels like this show is always in such a hurry to get to like the next big set piece, the next big revelation, the next bit of exposition it needs to give us. It just isn't able to really slow down and let us see these character dynamics. There are some good moments between characters, but it doesn't feel as well fleshed out as it could have been. So it also felt like they were worried that they weren't going to get a season 2, and so they really just wanted to, you know, do as much as they can this first season. And listen, when you have a first season, yes, you should go all out. You should give us an idea of what your show can really be, you know, really explore the parameters of the show. But I do think there's some things they could have easily held off on. There's some characters here I really think they could have waited to introduce. Like, for example, like I said, the Celestials. I just never felt like they were as important as they should be on this show. There's a character, Cherry Bomb, who is introduced, and I wish we would have gotten more of her. It seems like we're gonna get more of her in season 2, which is great, but like I wish they would have done more with them. The V's are a pretty big, you know, they're pretty prominent in this season, but we really only get a couple episodes of them. So these are just things I wish we got to see more of in the show, and I think it would have overall strengthened the show. But even when it comes to the character of Adam, who really is like the main villain of the season, there's just really not enough of him. He only appears in a couple episodes this season, and as a result, he ends up being kind of one note as a character. There are some moments here and there where we kind of see more of who he is and what he's dealing with and what his overall motivation is. But it just felt like since he is like the big overarching villain, like they really needed to do more with him, and they just really didn't. And again, I think if they had a couple more episodes, that really would have benefited the show. But again, the things the show does well, it does really well. It wears its heart in its sleeves. It has really well written characters overall, even if some of them aren't, they don't go as in depth with them as I wanted to. I think just the things that the things that they set up with them are compelling enough to where I'm really excited to see what they're going to do moving forward. That being said, the finale of the show is honestly really good. I thought they did a really good job of ending the, season-long conflict of what was going on, but then also kind of setting up what was to come in the last couple moments. I thought they did a really good job with that. There's a lot of very satisfying moments that played way more effectively in terms of emotions than I was expecting it to, and I thought they did a really strong job with that. But overall, I really do enjoy this season. I know that there are things that I, wish they did a little bit differently, and there are some characters that I think got a bit shortchanged, but for the most part, I still was really enjoying this a lot. And it's also just really inspiring to get to see someone like Vivian Madrano, who is literally a YouTuber, and her having this pilot on YouTube for years, and to finally get to create the show and bring it to fruition. I mean, that's always great to see. And, considering how passionate she is about this show, considering just the overall love that she has for these characters and this world and everything like that, I'm just really excited to see where the show is going to go. I'm really happy it's taken off in the way that it has, and I'm really just hoping with season 2 being greenlit, us knowing that it's happening, I'm just really excited to see what else this show can do moving forward, what else we can get with these characters, because I feel like there's so many more possibilities that you can explore here. Like I said, the way they end off season 2 has me very excited to see how it's going to go. Overall, I really enjoyed this first season a lot. So B for season 1 of Hazbin Hotel. It's not a perfect season of television, but if you're looking for just a really fun, fresh sort of animated musical comedy, I think the show is definitely going to just really delight you in the way that it did for me. Definitely, while I think this is overall a very flawed show, it is still a show that I think is a very easy recommendation for the majority of people out there. All right, so now we get to number 9 on this list, and we go back to ones that I don't think a lot of people have talked about, and that is Expats. It's on Amazon, which admittedly is kind of a strange show to review, because while there are a lot of things I like about the show, there's one really great thing that overshadows everything else, and I'll get to that in a little bit, but I'll talk about the things that work really well here. The 3 center performances are all fantastic. Nicole Kidman, oh my god, is great in this show. I can't believe Nicole Kidman gives a great performance, but yes, she is very good in this show. She herself is, going through a situation where, she's lost her son all these years ago in... she's lost her son within Hong Kong, and she is really kind of grappling with that. She wants answers as to what's really going on, and you kind of see how much how much this has affected her life, and I think that she gives a really strong performance, particularly in the 4th episode of the show. She has some really strong scenes. I think that she just does some really great work here. I really enjoyed her performance in the show. But Sorry Ya Blue, I gotta say, But Sorry You Blue might give the stand-up performance of this entire show. I've always liked her in stuff I've seen her in, but I feel like she just really gets to showcase her acting chops in a way I haven't seen from her before. The character of Hillary is by far the most unlikable out of these 3, no question about it, but the arc that she undergoes in this show is so incredibly strong, and Blue just really gets a chance to flex her acting muscles here. There's one scene especially, it's in basically what's a bottle episode. All 3 of these characters are going through some major crisis within their lives, and they're all trapped in these locations, and she's kind of trapped in this elevator with her mother, and we see her just kind of get to pour out all of this resentment, all of this hatred, all the things that she's been wanting to say about herself, whether it's about her image, whether it's about her heritage, how ashamed she is of it, how much she's tried to kind of shy away from that, but also what's really gotten her to this point, why she has made the decisions that she has made up to this point. I just thought she absolutely killed it in this role. I don't think the show is going to get any Emmys, but if I had to give a performance right now, absolutely, Sorry You Blue really just deserves all the awards. I think she just really killed it in this show. I really loved her performance here, and I think that is definitely one of the main reasons to watch the show. Yoo Jae-yeon, also very good here. I've never really seen her much of anything as the character of Mercy, but I really enjoyed her character. She is maybe the most complex out of the three women. There's a very interesting sort of situation that she's going through. She's the youngest of them, but she also is going through this pregnancy of sorts, and there is a lot of interest there is a lot of contention revolving that pregnancy. I'm not really going to get into how and why and what exactly happened, but I thought that she was really great here. She's also a very frustrating character throughout a lot of this, but again, she goes through a pretty significant arc in the show as well, and in the last episode, she really gets to show off just how great of an actress she is, and I just really liked her a lot in the show. So I think those three women do a really good job. They carry the show really well. You find yourself really attached to the three of them, even if they aren't the most likable of characters. You just find yourself really entrenched in their lives just because of how talented the three of them are, but also how convincing they sell their performances. They're playing very flawed characters, and they do a really good job at portraying that in the show, so I thought that worked out really well. Lulu Wang continues also to just blow me away as a creator. I love what she did in The Farewell, but it feels like this even more so is kind of the show she wanted to make. And I feel like this is another really great project from her. It's a very different from The Farewell, but I think it's kind of touching upon similar ideas about like family and culture and things like that. But I think overall she does a really great job of helming this show, really diving deep into the lives of these women in a very intimate way, and I think that she does a really good job when it comes to that. So I really enjoyed her directing in this show. I think that part of the show is very strong. But then I gotta say, as good as those three performances are, there is one episode in this show that really just sticks out like a sore thumb over everything else, and that is the 5th episode of this show. It's called Central, and it's literally like an hour and 40 minutes long. I'm not even kidding. It's like the length of a movie, and that's because it actually was premiered at a film festival as just one movie, and it's an episode of television that is a kind of an anomaly because it's literally the penultimate episode of the show, but yet I also think you can watch this episode without watching any of the rest of the show. So it kind of makes sense why they would premiere that at a film festival, because I was kind of scratching my head when I heard that this was the one they premiered, but watching it, yeah, I totally understand why she did that, because it almost feels like a different project entirely. While most of the show we are revolving around these three women, the 5th episode kind of turns things on its head. We're focusing less on these three women and more of the helpers who are, kind of playing a role in, and more of the helpers who are natives of Hong Kong and who have resided there and who are forced, and who work for the women that we're seeing in the show and have hopes and dreams of their own, and what that really means to them, and, how much has their culture been compromised, and, what are their thoughts on everything. And that to me is infinitely more interesting than what we get throughout the rest of this show. The 5th episode, it really just gives you an idea of what this show is really all supposed to be about. The whole show, I think, is really focusing on the struggles that these helpers are trying to achieve, and how that is, and how these three women are kind of getting in the way of that. These three women who aren't from Hong Kong, they're tourists, and how are tourists getting in the way of what they're supposed to be doing, and things like that. I think is just really well done in this show. We focus on these two different helpers and the connection that we feel to them. It's just so incredibly well done, and both their performances are extraordinary, but especially Ruby Ruiz as Essie. oh my god, I mean, she rips her heart out in this show. Just the love that she has for everybody, but this personal goal that she's trying to achieve as well. They just do a really great job with that, and I really do think this summed up the rest of the show better than the previous episodes have. I mean, everything they say about like the working class and how disregarded they feel from society and things like that. Most of the time we're dealing with these like, upper class rich characters. Here we're dealing with people who are middle class and are trying to achieve dreams of their own, and to me, I found that narrative to be so incredibly effective and what they were able to do. And it's not like, we don't see these three characters in the rest of the show. We do, but we frame them in a much different light. We recognize that they are privileged. They have their own, they themselves are very unaware of just how, how privileged they are and how spoiled they can be and how unfair they're being to these women. And I thought, like I said, that episode is way more effective than what came in the rest of the show. And it's an episode that is so good that the rest of the show just kind of pales in comparison. I honestly think that Wang could have just had that one episode and that would have been enough. I think the rest of the show is still very effective. I enjoyed the character of Margaret. I enjoyed the character of Hillary. I enjoyed the character of Mercy. But that one episode really is the thing that you remember from the show. I mean, there's one moment in particular involving the character of Hillary, and it completely reframes her. The way that you view her in this episode compared to the rest of the show, it's so incredibly different, and I can't really get into it too much without spoilers, but there are some truly anger-inducing moments, and without that episode, I mean, we just wouldn't be able to view these women in this light, and I think they do a really good job with that, but it also kind of works against the rest of the show because of the story that they're trying to tell. So, again, it's a weird show to review because on one hand, I think there's a lot it does well, but then you have this one episode that just overshadows literally everything else. It's just it's just that great of an episode in that way. And I think, when you take that episode away from the show, it's still a really well done show. There's just some things that aren't quite as strong. The impact just isn't there as much. And I think really my main issue with this show is that there are a lot of things that are set up in the beginning here that by the end, they don't necessarily feel as important as they did. And I'm just kind of confused as to why the show decided to go about things that way. There's an overarching narrative, and it seems like this is what the show is going to be about. And then, well, that's actually not what it's about. And instead, we're telling this story. And I just didn't feel that that worked quite as well as it needed to. There's some other characters here that I just feel are completely underwritten. Especially when it comes to Margaret's husband, of Clark. Brian T is good in the show. He has some good moments, but we really don't get to see enough of like his reaction to things and how he's really feeling about, what's going on. And I think they could have done a better job with that. And his character and, what is he really compromising, in his life and things like that. I think they could have focused more on that within the show. But again, I think there's a lot that it does do really well. It's shot beautifully. I really enjoy a lot of the shot compositions here. The final shot of this show is extremely powerful and really just leaves you with a very interesting it gives you a very interesting sort of feeling and kind of underlines the points that the show is trying to make. There's some really interesting choices throughout the show. Episode 4, the entire episode, like I said, it's like all three of our characters, but they're all in different locations, so you're kind of watching like 3 bottle episodes at once, and I think they do a really good job with that. There's just some things that didn't end quite as satisfyingly as I wanted it to, and I think that's what does bring down this show for me. I also think the first 3 episodes are very slow paced, and sometimes that is to the show's detriment, and I think if they would have picked things up a little bit more, it would have been that much more effective. But overall, I mean, I really can't recommend this enough. I think just for that 5th episode alone, it's worth watching, but I don't want to act like the other 5 episodes are bad. I liked every episode of the show. It really is just one of those things where, like, you see how different one episode is, and that's what you remember. You don't remember the other episodes as much, and that's kind of where I'm at with this one. Overall, though, I do really recommend it. I do think it's a very strong show. There's a lot that it does do really well. I think Lulu Wang continues to assert herself as a true talent to watch out for. I love these stories she's telling. about her culture and different sort of, storylines trying to tell about communities and tourism and things like that. I think she does a really great job with that here. And overall, I think this was just very, very well done. I definitely do recommend it. So B for Expats, not a show that a lot of people have seen, but one that I definitely do think is worth taking a look at for sure. All right, so now we go to number 8, and number 8 here we have One Day, which I think is one that a lot of people were familiar with. The show kind of did blow up onto Netflix, and honestly, I think it's pretty deserving. There's a lot of things about the show that I instantly gravitate towards. I see a lot of, immediately I see comparisons of like the Before trilogy, but also it's also kind of Normal People, which came out, a few years ago. Definitely a better show than this, I will say. I don't think the show reaches the heights of either of those things, but it's very similar in the sense where we are following a couple, a bunch, basically each episode is following, a couple within a year and seeing how much has progressed or the lack of progress within their lives. And I think that hook works really well. Both of these characters you do find yourself really gravitating towards. I think the characters of Dex and Emma are characters I did find myself really latching onto throughout the show, but it also helps that Leo Woodall and especially Amika Mode are fantastic here. Both of them give really strong performances, really just adding so many nuances to these characters and doing a really great job. I think Dex in particular is a character I really found myself relating to. He has a goal that he wants to achieve in the beginning of the show, and he, throughout the show, as he is trying to achieve that goal, it doesn't necessarily go in the direction you're expecting it to. And I really enjoyed his growth throughout the series. It was very interesting to see. It didn't go where I was, thinking it was. And I'm someone who's not overly familiar with the source material. I haven't seen the movie like Anne Hathaway and Jim Sturgis. I've heard it also isn't that great of a movie, so that's why I haven't bothered with it. But I thought that his whole character was really well handled. And Emma as a character, I really enjoyed here as well. She's kind of struggling to find her place. She's not entirely sure what she wants to do. We see her throughout the show take on a bunch of different jobs. And like I said, the journeys for both of these two characters were very much not what I was expecting to see, but I really like what the show is trying to say. There's a lot of time that the show spends with them together, but there's equally just as much as there is of them apart. And what the show's really trying to get at is, are these two better when they're together, or do their journeys align? Can they actually coexist, or are they just better off pursuing their own separate stuff? And that's something I think they did a really good job with in the show. Also, the passage of time, that element is employed very well here. Although that is sometimes to the show's detriment, which I'll talk about in a little bit, but I think there's a lot that the show does do really well. There's some really hard-hitting moments here as well that just you don't realize how attached you are to these characters until those moments come along. But when they do, they're extremely effective, and I was really impressed by how well I was really just taken by how well they were able to deliver that and how well they were able to get the emotions out of me that they did. I mean, I wasn't like crying or anything, but I definitely did feel emotional towards the show, and I thought that they did a really good job with that. So there's a lot of things the show does do very well. I think it's really well written. I think there's quite a few characters here that maybe they don't appear a lot, but you still get an impression out of them, and I think that that's something else that the show did really well. I think the thing that brings it down for me is that there is I talked about how there is this passage of time going on with the show, and when I say passage of time, there is a lot of time that is passing within the show. We start off in like the 80s, and we go all the way to the early 2000s. I think even like 2007 is like where we end up going. And while I think that is a really good idea, and I think there's a lot they get out of that, because of the fact that we're always skipping time, there are a lot of events that end up happening off screen, and with that there's also characters that kind of phase in and out of each other, of both of their lives. And it just doesn't feel like we're able to get enough of an idea of what these characters have really been through. What are the struggles that they have endured? We have a, surface level idea, but sometimes I just felt a bit disconnected. Like, at one point it seems like something's going well for this character, then the next episode comes by, oh, it's not going as well. And I wish we could have, I know obviously we can't see those moments in between, but I feel like there were ways where they could have maybe filled in the gaps of what these characters are going through, so I would have felt that much more connected, because I will be honest in saying there were some characters in the show that I just had a hard time latching onto. I had a hard time really caring about, mainly other characters that aren't Emma and Dex. I just didn't really feel that connection towards. I didn't really feel like I understood them. The only character I can really say that I felt like I really had like a strong connection to was probably Dex's dad. There's a really great moment with him in, I believe it's either like the seventh or the like fifth or sixth episode of the show, that I thought was probably one of the most poignant moments of this show, and I thought that worked really well. But there is a handful of characters here that I just had a hard time really latching onto, and again, it's just because of the fact that so much time passes, it just feels like we don't get enough time to get to know that character. And I don't know how they could have fixed that, whether they have every episode be like an hour long and things like that, or if they would have spent a little bit more time in each time period. I know that kind of ruins the whole conceit of the show, but I think there was a way to work around it, and I think that sometimes does hurt the show a little bit. There's also things that I just wish we would have gotten to see a little bit more of, but that's really my only issue with this. I think the way things end up wrapping up, I mean, the message the show leaves you on is very different from where you would expect a story like this to typically go. I really like where they ended up going with this story. Like I said, it takes some pretty big swings, and there's some really hard-hitting moments, but they all feel very earned. They all feel very effective. It never feels melodramatic in that way. It feels like they're telling this very authentic story about these two people and all the journeys that they end up going on and how they end up coming in and out of each other's lives, and I thought that ended up just working out so well. So overall, yeah, I really do recommend this one. I think this is another show that I think a lot of people are really going to end up enjoying. It definitely can get very emotional points, but the chemistry between these two is just absolutely irresistible, and I think that's enough of a reason to just really enjoy this one overall. It ends on a pretty emotional note as well, and it's definitely a show that I found myself just really liking. It's also 14 episodes. It's one of the longer shows I'm talking about here, and I think it really does get a lot of mileage out of those 14 episodes, although I wish there were some things in between that maybe could have helped. Overall, I just really enjoyed this one, so B+ for one day. I think this is a far better show than you are expecting it to be, and overall, I thought that this concept, they really just got a lot out of this concept. Yes, we've seen it done before, but I think the story they told here was a very effective one, and I thought they handled everything really well here. All right, we're getting to the end of this, going to number 7 here. Another show that I think a lot of people were talking about for a while, kind of fell off, as streaming service shows tend to do, unfortunately, even though this one had a weekly release. I haven't seen a lot of people talk about it since then, but we do have a season 2 coming, and I'm very excited to talk about it, and that is the first season of Percy Jackson and the Olympians, which to me is like the perfect example of how you should start off a show like this. This sort of a YA fantasy type show. This is a very good first season. Very good way to kind of lay the groundwork, get us to understand the mythology, get us to really understand, the world building and the adventure of it all. The show does a really good job with all that. And if for someone who, I know I say this with everything, I did watch the first Percy Jackson film, but like aside from that, I read a little bit of The Lightning Thief, but similar to most books, I didn't end up finishing it. I don't have a lot of knowledge when it comes to this world. I know that it's a fan base that a lot of people really love. I know that it is a world that a lot of people have, it's a world that a lot of people have a lot of love for. There's a very huge fan base out there, and this show makes a very good case as to why. I think the way they set up the world of all these gods and goddesses and things like that, I think the way they set up the world of all these different gods and goddesses and things like that is really well done in this show. I really found myself fascinated by the world that they set up here, but also the characters that inhabit it, I think are really well written here. All three of these characters, I mean, Percy Jackson is just such an interesting lead. Everything that he is going through in this show, you know, he himself is dealing, you know, even stuff like smaller things like the bullying that he deals with and the way that he's thrust into this whole thing. I mean, one day he's just living his life and then his mom tells him all this stuff that he is meant to do, and he's immediately put into, you know, this school, and he goes on this mission where he's going to be the one to like restore order to like Olympus once and for all, and you kind of see him really grappling with how he's going to go about this. How is he going to become this demigod? How is he going to step into this role? I mean, one, I think Percy Jackson's such a great character, but Walker Scobell really just does such a great job of adding so much emotion and likability to this character. You really find yourself latching onto him, and I think he just does such a great job in this show. I really enjoyed his arc throughout this entire season, but also the character of Annabeth, they do some great work with in this show. I mean, I really like what we get with her, and you know, kind of showing the complexities of her character. She is someone that is this very loyal friend to Percy as well as Grover, who we'll talk about in a little bit, but she herself also comes from this rocky upbringing and things like that, and you kind of see how she is contemplating throughout the show, you know, where she really fits into all this. Is she trying to help Percy, or is she influenced by, you know, other outside factors? And I thought her character was really interesting. The growth that she had throughout this show, I thought was just really strong. And Leah Sava Jeffries, I've never seen her in really anything before, but I think she's going to be a huge name moving forward after the show. I think we're going to see her in a lot of stuff, and I really like what she did in this show. I thought that she was definitely one of the big standouts. And then Orion Simhardry as Grover, he doesn't have as much to do in this season. He's very much used as like the comic relief, but he works really well as such, and he has some of the most heartfelt moments of the entire show. I really enjoyed his character a lot. I think, like I said, these three really anchor this show. They are the heart and soul, and this is what I was talking about with Avatar. It's like when you have three actors that work so well together, you want to keep them together, and this show does, for the most part, keep these three together. And like I said, I think the three of them just work really well together. But beyond that, there's some other really strong performances here. Virginia Cole as Percy's mother, Sally, is phenomenal in this show. I mean, they give her a lot to work with here. She has one scene in the penultimate episode in particular that is one of the most memorable scenes of this entire show. You understand the sacrifices that Sally has to make, but also the reluctance in her. She doesn't really want to have to do all of this to her son. She wishes her son could just have a normal life, but she understands, you know, what really needs to happen, and sort of like the guilt that, you know, the guilt that she feels with what Percy is getting himself involved in. It's just so well handled, and Cole just really sells that character so well. I thought she was definitely one of the huge standouts of this show overall. And then, you know, someone like a Jason Mantzoukas or a Megan Mullally, or say even a Glenn Turman, they're all really good in the show. Everyone makes a really great impression. But Adam Copeland, I gotta say, is definitely one of the biggest standouts here as Ares. He's so incredibly self-centered, and he's so incredibly cocky and so full of himself, but yet there's something that is so endearing about that to watch. His interactions with Grover in particular in the show are just so great. I wish we got more of him. I thought he was just such a huge standout here, and I loved what he ended up doing throughout this show. So again, there's so much that works really well here. Rick Riordan, also being one of the creators, is fantastic. You know, he's the one who's behind all these books, and so you can feel his vision throughout the whole thing. You can feel that he is making sure that this is as accurate of an adaptation as possible, but also is expanding upon what he's written in the books, and I think that he does a really good job of that. Again, as someone who's not too familiar with what's going on, I don't know a ton of like what he did differently here, but you really do feel his influence throughout the show, and I think that's something that works very well here. I think the look and feel of everything is really well done. So yeah, there's a lot that really just works really well here. There's a lot of strong sequences. I think the thing that does hurt this show for me is that it is very episodic in nature, in that almost every episode is we're going to this location and we're meeting these new characters, but the show doesn't necessarily spend enough time with some of those characters to really make an impression. This is especially the case for like Lin-Manuel Miranda, who the casino episode is probably the weakest episode of the show for me. I didn't really feel like we got enough out of that location. For the most part, the show does a good job at making sure we get the most out of every place we venture to, but there are those moments, like I said, like the casino, for example, I just felt like we didn't get enough out of it. And then the finale, there's some aspects that felt kind of rushed to me, and I wish the show would have dived a bit deeper into it. But where we leave things off after this, I am very intrigued to see where the show goes from here. I think this has potential to be one of the best fantasy shows on TV right now. I'm very happy to see it's getting a season 2. Very likable cast, very interesting, journey for this character and things like that. I'm generally hooked. I can't wait to see where the show does go moving forward, and I think there's just a lot of potential here. There's a lot of adaptations of shows like this that come around and they really don't deliver, but I think this one really did. I think this really made a great impression of what this show can really do, and kind of diving deeper into the lore, diving deeper into these characters, giving us a better exploration of some of these ideas and concepts and things like that. I think there's a lot that this show can really do moving forward, so I'm really excited to see where it does go from here. Overall, I really love this one. I think if you have any hesitancy, going into this, if you're a fan, you will definitely be impressed by how this does turn out, because I think this show just has a lot to offer, and I really just enjoy it a lot. So A- for the first season of Percy Jackson and the Olympians. I was honestly pretty blown away by how great this was. I was hoping it would be at least a solid adaptation, but it was far beyond what I was expecting, and I generally really love this show quite a bit. All right, well, now we go to number 6 here, and number 6 is a show that literally just recently got a season 2, and that, of course, is Ted, a show that was so much better than I really could have imagined. I really enjoyed the movies a lot. I think that they did a great job of blending the typical raunchy, crude humor we associate with Seth MacFarlane with this genuine sense of heart and these really, strong characters and things like that. But I really didn't know how this show was going to be, but honestly, I think it might just be the best thing we've gotten from this character yet. I think there's so much great stuff that this show ends up accomplishing. For one, I think we have some really great characters here. The portrayal of Ted that we see in the show feels the most well fleshed out we've ever really seen. This is a Ted who's in a very different phase of life. He is way more of this, teenager and things like that. You kind of get to see Ted when he was in his heyday, when he was still new, when people were still used to him being this sentient teddy bear, and sort of like the fame that he developed and things like that. I think they do a really good job. And again, Seth MacFarlane really toes that line very well between just the very raunchy and just very unpleasant nature of Ted, where you're like, why are you saying this thing? But then also giving you, finding the heart and relatability with his character. He does a really good job with that here, and I think they do some really great stuff with him. Max Burkholder also, as a much younger John, is really good here. You really buy him as that character. You understand, that he's in a different phase in his life, similar to Ted. He makes a lot of decisions that are really dumb, but you understand why he is. He's a very dumb teenager, but he also, always is he's trying to do the right thing. He's trying to, be as good as he possibly can, but at the same time, he's very rebellious and things like that, but he always, has his heart in the right place, and I think that's what works so well about John as a character. And I thought he was just really well handled. The dynamic between him and Seth MacFarlane, they work so well together. I love the way they play off of each other, and I just really enjoyed their dynamic throughout the show. But it's the characters aside from Ted and John, who John is a really good character here. You see him navigating high school and all this different stuff that he's trying to accomplish. You have some classic sitcom type situations here. One of the episodes involved him and Ted renting porn, and that honestly is one of the funniest episodes of the entire show, just them discovering porn and their reactions to it. I thought just produced some of the best laughs in the show. but it's the other characters alongside them that really make this show into something special, particularly when it comes to the characters of Maddie and Blair. I thought were so well written in this show. Scott Grimes does such a great job at playing this character that at first is so unlikable and has these deeply conservative views, and you don't understand why he feels the way that he does. You think he's going to be very one note. It's like we've seen this story done before, but he has a reasoning for why he is that way, and he has this haunted past of sorts that we really dive deeper into, and he becomes a much better character because of that. And that's not something I was expecting from the show. I wasn't expecting them to go deep into these characters, but they really do. And I think his character is easily some of the best. The best episode of the show actually involves his character and a similar childhood toy that he used to have, in this whole arc of sorts that childhood toy ends up going through. And I never thought I would say that a truck has literally one of the best arcs in the entire season, but that is what we're dealing with here. There is literally this toy truck, and just that whole episode is so well done. It gets you to fully understand Maddie's character, but also gets you to understand this toy truck's character and how the toy truck has kind of, learned things and things like that, why people act the way that they do, the ignorance that they have, and all that stuff. I think the show dives into those things, really well, and I really enjoyed everything they did with that character. But then there's the character of Blair, who I think is maybe the highlight of this entire show. I mean, she gives this show so much authenticity and really ends up being kind of, I think, the heart of this entire series. She is someone who is very staunch within her views. She's the complete opposite of Maddie, in the sense where, yes, she is, she's this liberal of sorts, and she has very clear political views, and there's a lot of secrets that she's harboring from these characters, but she also you see throughout the show, she grows to care for this family. She grows to really love them, and I really enjoyed the arc that she ended up going through in this show. I like the dynamic she had with John and Ted. I just thought she was a fantastic character. Georgia Wiggum plays her very well. I found her to be very likable, has some really funny moments here, and I just thought overall she works really well. She kind of at first is the reactionary role, where she's the one kind of calling people out on things and things like that. Does kind of feel like she's here as a way to be like, whoa, you can't say these things and all this stuff, but her character serves a much greater purpose than that, and I think that she does a really great job. And then Alana Ubach is also really good. I think all the characters are really strong here, but again, it's what you end up getting from this show. The show has so much more to say than you really expected to, and I think they do a really good job with that, to the point where I really am excited to see what they end up doing in season 2. I think there's so many more topics you can dive into, the way they utilize the 90s setting. Again, the comedy in the show is just top notch. I found myself honestly just laughing hysterically at so many moments throughout the show. And what's great about the show is we have some truly ridiculous comedy here. There was a moment at the end of episode 3 that had me absolutely howling with laughter. It involves a narration. I'm not going to say much more than that, but you have moments like that, but then you're still able to ground it with characters, and that's something I think the show just does so incredibly well. It never compromises one for the other, and it's able to seamlessly blend those two elements together perfectly, and I was just really impressed by the way they were able to handle that very difficult balance that the show was able to achieve, and I thought they did just a really strong job with that all around. I think really my only issues with this season is that sometimes the episodes can run a little long. Some of the episodes here clock in at over 40 minutes. The last episode in particular very much does not need to be. I think there's definitely some moments that could have been, cut out of the show and things like that. I don't think every episode needed to run as long as it did. And then there's some other characters that I just think they needed to do that they needed to develop a little bit more. There are these bully characters, for example, that seem like they're going to be prominent, and then they just kind of disappear, and we never really get an explanation as to why. There's some other characters that kind of phase in and out of here, and I wish we could have gotten a little bit more from them. But other than that, I thought the show was just fantastic. It really felt like this was a show that Seth MacFarlane has wanted to do for a very long time. Like, there were things he wanted to do with the Ted character that he wasn't able to do in the films, and now he can do them here. And seeing that they have a season 2, I mean, there's so much more they can bring to the table. I'm so excited to see what they're able to do moving forward. I think this show is just an example of like what a prequel can do. You know, you take the story that worked in the movies, but you expand upon it, you add some other characters that add deeper layers and just bring such a fresh perspective. That's exactly what Seth MacFarlane is trying to do here. He's trying to show, like, I can tell different kinds of stories. I'm not just a one-trick pony, you know, like people have accused him of being. He really does show that when he puts his heart and soul into something, he really does have the juice, and it's really great to see. I think this is absolutely the show that Seth MacFarlane needs to prioritize moving forward, and I really hope he continues to do that, because I think the show just has so much more left to give, and I can't wait to see what else, you know, what other ideas he ends up coming up with, because I think there's so much more you can do with this concept overall. Yeah, overall, I'm a really big fan of this. Peacock has not had a lot of hits, but I think this is absolutely going to be one of their flagship shows for sure. This will maybe be the thing that finally gets them off the ground, because it seems like people have actually been watching this show and enjoying it. So yeah, I really, really do recommend this one. A- for Ted. Much better show than I think I ever could have imagined. All right, so we have made it to the top 5, and at number 5, we have a show that for a while was like very much in my top 3, very much was going to qualify as like one of the best shows of the year. I still think it's a really damn good show, just wasn't quite as high on it as I initially was, and that is Masters of the Air. Now, full disclosure, I have not seen Band of Brothers in the Pacific. I've seen some episodes of Band of Brothers in like history class, but I don't really remember, and in the Pacific, I haven't watched either. So I don't really have that kind of knowledge, and I can't really say how this measures up in quality to those two shows. What I will say is that this was a extremely effective look at war and just how horrifying that concept can really be. You know, we constantly see these characters signing up for this mission and them feeling like this is something good that they're doing, like they are signing up for something and this is going to, you know, change their lives and they're going to be heroes when they come out of this, but they don't realize what they're really getting themselves into. And as the show goes on and things start to become a lot more dire and, you know, casualties just start showing up left and right and, you know, they just start to continue to pile on, you see these characters really evolve and change. And I think that's what this show really does do the best, is really just showcase how much war changes these characters irrevocably and how they truly are so broken by the time it has ended. I think that's something that they do really well here. So many great performances in here as well. I mean, Austin Butler and Callum Turner just have such strong chemistry in this show. You really buy the friendship between the two of them. I think they work off each other really well. Austin Butler, I mean, just continues to show how incredible of an actor he is. There's this one moment, it doesn't even involve him saying anything. It's just like a look on his face that I thought was just so well done. It perfectly conveyed how he was feeling, the levels of just shock, but also, again, just seeing how much his character evolves throughout the show. I think he does a really great job. And Callum Turner, I mean, the character of John Bucky Egan has such a strong, sense of an arc throughout the show. He starts off and, like, he's just so excited about, like, going into war and things like that. And the way he shifts throughout the show, I thought was just really well done. But some of the other actors here, I mean, you have, like, Barry Keoghan and Isabel May, Belle Powley, who, you know, really adds a fresh perspective to the show whenever she comes on. I thought she was really great. Anthony Boyle is a huge standout as well. Really enjoyed his moments as Crosby. I thought he was a really great character. Then there is the character of Rosenthal, who doesn't really come into fruition until a little bit later on, but once he does, he's an immediate standout. Everyone is just really great here in terms of acting. I think all the performances are very strong in this show. I think the directing is also really great. It has this very propulsive and very it has this very sort of like propulsive and tense feel to it. You really do feel like, especially in the aerial sequences, like you are right alongside these characters, you know, in this very treacherous and just very death-defying environment. You don't really know what you're fully getting yourself into, but then once you do, you can't even really catch your breath because it's all happening at once. All of these, terrible things are happening at once, and you just see how much these characters and, all of what these characters end up going through. I think they did a really great job with that in the show, and really just showing how frequent these casualties really were, and how often these things would occur, but how all of them were expected to just move on to the next mission and never forget what they're fighting for, and how much harder that continues to be as the show goes on. I think that's something this show just does a really great job in showcasing, again, seeing how both of these characters, because for a while Bucky or the characters of Cleveland and Egan are very much like they very much are the focus of the show, and you really do see how much they evolve. But there's a certain point when that stops being the focus, and that's where we get to the stuff that didn't work quite as well for me in this show. I think the first 6 episodes have a really great pace to them. You understand the story that they're trying to tell. You really end up liking, you like all the characters. The scenes where they are, in the air are some of the most suspenseful, some of the most gripping sequences you'll see in any show this year, but also having these really solid characters and just seeing their perspective on everything. The show is very much trying to pay that focus on these soldiers that have been forgotten, who were really just names. They want to give a voice to them, and I think they do a really great job with that in the show. It's very hard hitting in that way. The last 3 episodes, I thought, honestly did drop a bit in terms of quality. Not to the point where I didn't like the show, because I really still enjoyed the last 3 episodes. It just, compared to how well the first 6 episodes fleshed everything out and got you to understand the characters and you fully understood the mission, I felt the last 3 just tried to do a little bit too much. Like, for example, in one of the episodes, while we have this mission of sorts that's going on, we also are simultaneously focusing on the Tuskegee Airmen, and that it wouldn't be a terrible idea if they really are only relevant for the last 2 episodes, and the show tries to pay just as much focus to them as they do to the characters we've been developing, and kind of sacrifices that development for the characters we've been developing. And that really ended up being a problem for me. I think if you were going to have those characters, you should have introduced them a lot earlier on, because they're definitely important. Like, I don't want to act like they're not. They have a very clear significance to the plots, but like they have a very clear significance to the story and what's going on here. Like, you absolutely need to include them, but I just felt they came in a little bit too late. And I think, yes, maybe it might not have been the most accurate timeline considering when they showed up, but I do think they could have still found a way to intertwine both storylines like at once, so it just didn't feel like we're just inserting these characters all of a sudden and now they're supposed to have a relevance to the show that they didn't before. It just felt kind of jarring in that way. There's some other events that occur that just felt a little bit rushed to me, and I also feel that there are just too many characters by the end of the show. There's a lot of characters here where I'm just like, I don't feel like we got enough out of this character. I feel like we had a clear focus here, and then the show kind of shifts. Like I said, for a while, it's focused on the characters of Cleveland and Egan. They're very much the focus of this, but then the show kind of shifts to being about Rosenthal, and then it's more about the character of Crosby, and then, like I said, you factor in the Tuskegee Airmen, so it just feels like there's sometimes too much going on here, and we don't have enough time to focus on anything, and that, I think, did hurt the flow of the show. I think the pacing in episodes 7 and 8 were especially just kind of off for me, but the last episode really just does a great job of bringing everything home, really getting a sense of how much these characters have been affected by the war and how much things have changed. There's this great moment between Crosby and Rosenthal, especially in the last episode, that I thought just perfectly summed up the entire point of the show and what they're trying to go for. I mean, the Bloody 100th, really just, they never knew what they were fully getting themselves into, and just seeing how they evolve and change throughout the show, I thought was just so well done. The focus on the soldiers and how things end up going, I thought was just really well handled here. I do think this maybe should have been a little bit shorter. I will say I think maybe 9 episodes was a little bit too much. It does feel like it goes on a little bit too long. Maybe 6 episodes would have been fine. 8 episodes I think even would have been fine, but 9 I think was maybe just a little bit too much. But I still felt like by the end this was highly impactful. I think that they did a really great job at what they did dive into. There are some things that I wish they did a little bit more with, but what we got here was just such an immensely powerful series that is one that I'm really never going to forget, especially the first like 6 episodes I thought were just really strong overall. It was such a captivating show that I really just wish more people were talking about. Yes, we've gotten a lot of shows about war and things like that, but this one I think frames it in a different perspective, and I really like the way they went about it. So overall, I thought this was just a really well handled show. A- for Master of the Air. Like I said, was a little bit higher on the first few episodes, and I think it kind of it doesn't necessarily drop the ball towards the end. It's just not quite as good as it initially was, but I still think this is like a damn good show that is absolutely a must-see for anyone that may stumble across it. All right, so now we go to number 4, and number 4 is a show that literally also just got renewed as I'm filming this video, and that is Mr. and Mrs. Smith. Now, I will say, unlike some of these other shows I've talked about, I actually have seen the original movie of this show, and it's not very good. Brad Pitt, Angelina Jolie, they're good for what they have, but the plotline just isn't super compelling. They don't really do that much with it, and I feel like this show is just a much better representation of what you can get from this story. We have these characters of John and Jane, and what's good about this show is that from the beginning, this is not a married couple that doesn't know that each other's a spy. No, these are two people that are have been randomly selected, and now they're going on this, like, basically a suicide mission of sorts, and they're not really sure, what they're really getting themselves into, and they have to go after, they're working with this, mysterious organization, and the whole show pretty much is focused on their relationship, but also their characters. Who are they really outside of just being these agents? Are they in this relationship because they're forced to be and they have to work alongside each other, or are they actually developing feelings? And is that a good thing that they're developing feelings? I think the show dived into that really well, and I really like the way the show dived into the concept of that. There's a really great episode, for example, where these two stumble upon this other spy couple, and they kind of get their perspective on things and kind of their clashing ideals, and I thought that was a really interesting idea what they decided to do with that. But also seeing the lives that these two characters used to have and the things that they want to pursue. Are they still able to pursue those things, or is that completely compromised by them now being these agents? And I think that is just a really interesting sort of development they end up going with these two characters, and I really like the path that they set the two of them on. But it also helps that Donald Glover and Maya Erskine are just absolutely electric in these roles. The chemistry that they have is some of the most raw and authentic I have seen in anything in a very long time. The two of them just work so incredibly well together, and they have such different ideals. They have such different stances on things, and I think that's what makes the show so interesting to watch. Yes, you like watching the spy moments, and those are very intense, but there isn't as much as you would expect there to be. There's a lot more focus on them as characters, and what they end up going through in this show I thought was just so incredibly well done. I love the journey that these two characters end up going down throughout the show. I also really like the way this show portrays their relationship, because they both have very different ways of looking at it. One might like it more than the other. One might, see it as more serious than the other. And how does that conflict things? How does that affect their mission in any way? I think that was a really interesting approach that the show decided to go on. One of the best episodes of this show, I think, is literally these two in couples therapy, and the two of them trying to work things out, and you understand some of the other differences that they've had, and I think they do a really good job with that. But then as the show goes on and they do get further into things, I mean, things really do intensify for both of them, and you really are not just questioning whether their relationship's going to survive, but are they going to survive? They really do a great job of getting you to care about both John and Jane as people, and that's something I just really enjoyed watching throughout this show. You know, you don't just feel for them in this mission, you really do care about them as characters, and I thought they did a good job with that. But also, you know, adding in bits of comedy I think works really well. There's a sense there is a lot of good, you know, humor throughout the show, but also, again, when the action is there, it is really well done. The finale especially has this incredible chase sequence. I'm not going to say much about it, but just the way that whole sequence went down was so exhilarating to watch, and it's probably one of my favorite action set pieces out of anything I watched this year. I think all of that is really great here. And the finale in general is just a really satisfying end to this show. I really liked where they took both of these characters, how we really do dive deep into the insecurities that both of them have and the things that they haven't really been willing to admit to each other, because they really are trying to, you know, keep their cards close to their chest. They know they don't really want to get attached, but yet you can see that throughout the show they are getting attached, and it's whether or not they are willing to, you know, they are willing to take that step. Is this just a mission for them, or do they want this to become something more serious? I think that's something the show just dives into really well here. So I think all of that works really well in the show. And like I said, I think the finale is just absolutely spectacular, the way they end up going about that. The things that don't work as well about this show is that there are some characters here that I just feel we don't really get enough out of. Paul Dano, for example, feels like he should be a way bigger presence in the show, especially with how they position him in the finale. They kind of make up for it in that episode, but I feel like his character needed just a little bit more growth, especially now that we know that they said in season 2 we're not going to be following these characters. I feel like his character in particular just needed a little bit more, and I would have felt that much more satisfied with what they did with him. There's some other characters here I wish we would have just gotten a little bit more with, but then there's some characters I think we got just enough with. Like Sarah Paulson only pops in for an episode, and I feel like they got a lot out of her. The directions that she went down, I thought they went in a really wild direction with her character that I wasn't expecting, and I thought that worked out really well. Parker Posey and Wagner Moura are immediate standouts here. They're playing a different couple that these two end up becoming close friends with. I thought they worked really well. Ron Perlman was really great for what he had in this show. But really, other than that, there really isn't too much to complain about with this one. I think this is just a really great adaptation that gets so much more out of this concept than the movie was able to. And it's these small little changes that they make that just make this such a more compelling story overall. And seeing the different paths that these two are trying to pursue, and whether or not they're able to do that, or are they just going to be spies for, you know, the rest of their lives and things like that. I think they just do a really great job with all of that. So yeah, I really enjoy this one a lot. I'm happy to see it's getting a season 2. I don't know how to feel about the fact we're not going to see these characters again. I think this concept can work if you have two really great actors working at the top of their game, but also have really great writing to support it. And I think as long as they're able to do that moving forward, I think the show has a bright future ahead of it, and I really hope they're able to maintain that overall. I really just enjoyed this a lot. I think it was very well written. I think that there were some really some really great characters, some really interesting twists and turns they took with this show. I overall was just a really big fan of this one, so A- for Mr. and Mrs. Smith. I think if you were disappointed in the movie and you really want to see this concept taken a little bit further, I think this show will definitely satisfy you what it's able to accomplish overall. All right, we now get to number 3, and listen, I've talked about a lot of shows here that I think are just really overlooked, and I wish more people were talking about them, but there's no show that breaks my heart more that didn't have more of a following than The Brother's Son, which is the next show that we're going to talk about. I mean, just a remarkable show all around. Right off the bat, I think that, the premise of the show is such an interesting one. You're focusing on two different brothers. One of them is this hitman of sorts, and he's been a hitman practically all of his life. The other one is, the complete opposite of that. He's just a normal guy. He's fresh out of college. He's trying to become an actor. He has a friend that is this drug dealer and things like that. He's kind of nerdy, and the two of them are, in fact, brothers, but aren't aware that the other has existed. They've kind of become estranged from each other in that way, and the whole show is about the two of them having to, come back together just because of and the whole show is about the two of them having to come back together to prevent this like assassination attempt on their family and keep their family safe and things like that. And Bruce, the younger son who's trying to become an actor, him figuring out what's going on, while Charles, who is like far more stoic and things like that, is also trying to kind of piece things together. I think it's just a really interesting concept. It's a really juicy concept for a show, and this show really just makes the most out of it. I think you have two really great actors here. Justin Chen is so good as Charles. He's every bit as stoic and tough, and every bit as he's every bit as stoic and tough, and has that gravitas that you expect an actor like him to really have. But you're also really compelled by Charles. You don't really understand why he is so married to this life. Why does he want to be why does he want to be this fight? Why does he want to be this gangster of sorts? Why is he so invested in that? You really do find out more about that throughout the show, and I think the more you do, the better his performance really does become. But you also recognize the care he has for his brother and how much he does want to keep his family together, and I think he is just so great in the show. He works really well here. And Samson Lee, I haven't seen either of these guys before, but I really do hope their careers end up taking off, because I thought they both were fantastic. But Samson Lee is so much fun in this show. Bruce is very much the comedic relief here, but he also has a really strong arc of his own, as he really does transform throughout the show, trying to adapt to this new lifestyle and things like that he barely understands, and really doesn't fully get what he's got himself involved in. But I thought he was just such a fun character. I love the arc he ended up going down, and I thought that he was just really great here. But of course, I mean, the main draw for this show, really the thing that had me most interested to check it out, was Michelle Yeoh, and she is just pitch perfect as Eileen, or Mama as they call her, as Mama Son. I just thought, she thrives so well at these very complex characters with these very emotional, with these traumatic pasts, and, having, characters that had to sacrifice a lot, and because of it had to make some really tough choices. And Eileen just fits so well in with that, and she just really kills it in this show. She absolutely is like the heart and soul of this series. There's a lot of decisions she makes through this show that you are questioning, but you understand the love that she has for both of her sons, and how she really just wants the two of them to come back together and wants them to get out of this situation as easily as they possibly can. And I thought that she was just fantastic in this show. There's one moment especially involving her talking to a therapist, and I mean, that's just like Michelle Yeoh at the top of her game. Like, that moment alone just shows why she's one of the best actresses working today. And I'm just so happy to see, after her Oscar win in Everything Everywhere, like, her career is just skyrocketing in a way that it really hasn't before. And I hope we continue to see that, because she truly is just one of the best working today, and this show just really reminds us of that. So those three actors alone are enough a reason to watch the show, but the writing is really just top notch. All around, I think Byron Wu and Brad Falchuk, who are the main showrunners here, just do a really great job at presenting this show and what it can really be, because the show is an amalgamation of a bunch of different things. I mean, on one hand, you have this, very intense, high-octane action going on, in which there are some really strong, set pieces when you have those, moments with just classic gangster fights and things like that. But then it also is this very grounded family drama, and I think that's when the show is at its most effective, is when you have those moments of, them all coming together and finding out more about their backstories and things like that. The way that they slowly reveal details of each of these characters, I think they do a really good job in, but also investing us in both of these characters. I found myself drawn to, just as drawn to Bruce as I was to Charles, and vice versa. I thought both of these characters were so interesting to watch, and seeing the different things going on within both of their lives, and their, them having to intersect, and whether or not, especially for Bruce, what does this really mean for him? Is he able to pursue the things he wants to? I thought all of that was really well done, but then still having this great sense of comedy throughout the show. There are a lot of moments here that made me laugh, and I was just really impressed by how well they were able to balance all of these different elements. It could very easily have crumbled, and this could have been a very overstuffed show But it just felt like they found that right type of balance, that right type of identity that really just made the show into something special. I love the world building we have here. The style and everything is just really well presented in the show, and I think they do a really great job with that. So there's so many things that work so well about the show. There's some twist reveals as well that, though yes, may have been a bit predictable, really do end up enriching the story in a way that makes it that much more interesting when you get a deeper sense of, what they are, what this whole organization is really all about, and what they all are really, what really has ended up happening, with this whole organization and things like that, and the tasks that they have had to perform and the consequences of those actions. All of that is really well done. But then I also, like I said, I'm just as invested on Bruce and him trying to pursue an acting career and him trying to pursue this relationship with this girl and things like that. I thought all of that was really well done. Or Charles and him running into his childhood friend Alexis and this sort of relationship they end up pursuing. I thought that was really well done. I think the only thing that hurts the show for me is there's a character that comes in towards the end of this season, and once he does, it gives this season a much bigger sense of stakes and a much bigger sense of tension and suspense that it didn't really have prior. The issue I had with it is that I just wish that he was there from the beginning. Episode 7 is probably my favorite episode of this entire show, and it really is just because of the presence of this character and what it really means for all of them. They build, and I don't want to spoil, what that's really all about, but they build up the presence of this character so well early on in the show. He doesn't really come in until episode 7, and when we get to the finale, some things were just, I think, resolved a little too conveniently. It felt like things were just kind of handled in a way that just felt kind of quick. There's something you think that's going to happen, and then it's resolved, and it's like, oh, okay, that's all that's going to happen. I still felt the finale was really well done, but I just felt like they could have done a little bit more regarding that specific plot line. But overall, this was just such a fantastic show all around. I really wish more people were talking about this. I think it's a very easy binge. It has some great actors involved. There's way more they could have done with the show. I will say the way they ended, it's not the worst way to wrap up the show. They didn't end on a massive cliffhanger or anything, so I'm kind of fine with them not having a season 2, but at the same time, I loved this world. I loved seeing all these characters. I loved where we end up taking things in the finale. I think there was so much more they could have done with the show, and it's just really disheartening that we're not going to get to see it continue in any way. But overall, I just really love this show a lot. I really wish more people were talking about it. I think it is easily one of the most overlooked shows of the year already. But Netflix doesn't release a lot of shows that I am overall this impressed by. This is one that I think you need to watch as soon as you possibly can. I really just think this is a show that they needed to promote a lot more. There's a lot of schlock that Netflix has that I just don't think they need to invest that much time in. Like Emily in Paris season 4. Like who really cares about Emily in Paris at this point? I know about Emily in Paris is that there's a channel I watch that does really good video essays on it. That's about as far as my knowledge goes with that. I love Lily Collins, but come on. We don't really need to invest in that show. That show gets 4 seasons, but The Brother's Son only gets 1. Come on. It's just Netflix needs to focus on what works, and this is absolutely one of their best shows that they have put out in a while. I really just can't recommend this one enough. A for The Brother's Son. I had it at an A- for a while, but really thinking about it, I think the show deserves an A. I really just love this one a lot, and I wish a lot more people were talking about it because it really is just something special. So really just can't recommend the show enough. All right, we are almost done here. Now we go over to number 2, and at number 2, we have a show that I was really excited about, and I'm very happy delivering the way that did, and that's True Detective Night Country. Yes, True Detective, new season. We haven't had a new season since literally, 2018, I think was when the last season came out, which feels like forever ago at this point. It's also the only other season I've watched in completion. So not really a lot when I say this is easily my favorite season that I have seen, because I've seen 0 episodes of season 1, I've seen 1 episode of season 2, all of season 3, and now all of Night Country. But to me, this is exactly what you should do when you have a long-running anthology series. I know it's only been 4 seasons, but True Detective's been going since, 2014? So yeah, it's been quite a bit, and I think having the new showrunner in Issa Lopez just brings such a fresh perspective to this show. She incorporates so many interesting ideas that I didn't really know how they were going to work. A lot of different elements here. I wasn't really sure how she was going to interweave those things into the show, but she does it really well. It's not one of those things where, you think it's going to go in this direction and then it doesn't. No, she fully commits to it, and it really does work with this show. And I think centering around these 2 characters who I found to be very compelling to watch. I mean, both Jodie Foster and Kaylee Rise are just fantastic in the show. Jodie Foster giving such a powerhouse performance in the show. The character of Danvers is not particularly likable at first. She is very abrasive. She has very she's incredibly by the book. She seems very apathetic to basically everybody around her except herself. And because of that, you're very put off by her. But you also see that she has this past of sorts that haunts her. And there's a reason why she is that way. And as we dive deeper into her character, we begin to understand why this is the way she presents herself. And Jodie Foster just brings so much to this role. Whether it's just the humanity she presents Liz with early on, or also just how she makes this character at first, who again is just very hard to latch onto, that, how she actually makes this character likable and relatable. I think she just does such a great job with that. There's this monologue she has in the last episode that really sticks with you, and I think she just does such a incredible job in the show. But Callie Rise honestly might be the standout here for me. I mean, I've never seen her in anything before. She is a boxer. This is really like her first major role. She's been in a couple movies prior to this that I have not seen, but she fucking kills it in this show. The character of Navarro is so incredibly compelling because she is someone that has a personal link to this case. She herself, is involved with the culture of, the people that were murdered in this case, and, she wants to do what she can to make sure, she herself is a native, and she wants to make sure that, the answers, that she wants to make sure that this case ends up getting solved, and you see how much this is getting to her, and just the differences between the 2 of them are so compelling to watch. They themselves have this past of sorts that have made them just absolutely detest each other, but yet are forced to work together to solve this case. That alone is so compelling to watch, and where they end up going with both these characters throughout this season, I thought was really interesting, and I really just enjoyed their whole dynamic, and that is enough a reason to enjoy the show. But then you have other characters in here, like John Hawkes' character, who also, similar to Danvers, I mean, he is such a irredeemable piece of shit throughout this entire show that you cannot wait to see get his comeuppance, but at the same time, he also has his reasonings for that. There's some interesting things they do with him that I thought worked out really well. He has this son, Peter, who is one of the officers who you really feel a lot of sympathy for. He has this family that he's trying to support, and he's constantly weighed down by his father, and I thought their whole storyline was really interesting to watch throughout the show. I really liked the way they went down, and kind of mirroring Liz's relationship to her daughter, Leah, who she has very little of one with. Leah frequently disregards her. She's very rebellious. She's very much doing her own thing. She gets very deeply entrenched into this case and into the culture that's surrounding it, and I found her to be a very interesting character. The directions that she went down I thought worked out really well here. So you have some really great characters on this show, but I think the other thing that works really well is the contrast in terms of the setting of the show. I mean, the whole setting, it takes place in Alaska when it's like, when it's like below like negative 23 Celsius, I think is what they said. That's literally the time, how that is literally what it was when they filmed this show, and you feel that coldness throughout this entire thing. It provides this very ominous sort of feel throughout the show. You never really know what's going to happen. You're always really unsettled throughout it, and I think they do a really great job of just heightening the tension here. I was really impressed by the setting and the way they ended up. It really ended up becoming a character of its own in that way. I really enjoyed that throughout the show. But the show also has a lot to say about a variation of topics, whether it be racism and that being connected to why this case has not been solved, the ineptitude of, just law enforcement and things like that. I think that's something the show dives into very well. Really also paying roots to the culture surrounding this and getting us to really understand that culture and why it's so, why this keeps happening to them and things like that. I think that also is really well done. The trauma that surrounds both of these characters, like I said, they both have their own sort of personal tragedies that they're dealing with, and I found that to be a really interesting element of this show overall. So I think overall there's a lot of things that work really well here. I love the cinematography. I really enjoy the writing here a lot. The only thing that really brings down the show for me is that there are a couple characters that are introduced here that feel like they're going to have a little bit more of an impact than they really do. The character of Rose, played by Fiona Shaw, I really like her. She's very intriguing. There is this darkness to her that you really find yourself latching onto. There's this mystery to her that you really find yourself latching onto. What she ends up amounting to in the show, it just wasn't all that satisfying for me. I wish they did a little bit more with her because I was really into her character, but she always just felt kind of secondary. It's like they had Fiona Shaw, they wanted to utilize her, but they didn't really know how to do it. She has a really good moment in the finale, but after that, it just doesn't really amount to all that much, and I wish they did more with her. And also Christopher Eccleston in this show. He is this character, Connolly, who is Danvers' former lover, and he also is a captain in the he also is he's one of the officers, and his character, again, just didn't really do a ton for me. Every scene he shares with Danvers is kind of the same thing over and over again, and I just felt like they need a little bit more to him. He also is another one of the cops in the show that are very much very abrasive and don't really care about the situation. I feel like you already kind of have that with John Hawkes. You don't really need Eccleston's character in there, so I felt his character overall was a little bit underwritten. But other than that, I thoroughly enjoyed this show throughout. It ends in a very emotional way. It doesn't really go towards the direction that you're expecting it to, but like I said, I think the interesting angles that Lopez took, I think that placing in a different setting, having two really compelling characters, some great performances from pretty much everybody involved, diving into some really interesting topics. It's just the perfect way to keep the show fresh and exciting and really bring something different, a different kind of energy that hasn't been there before. So I'm really happy that Lopez is signed on to continue other seasons of the show. I like the voice that she brings, and I think she brings such an interesting perspective that the show hasn't had before, and I'm really excited to see what else she brings to the table. So overall, I really love this one a lot. I know some people were disappointed in the finale, but I thought the finale was thoroughly satisfying. I thought it worked really well. It went in some really personal directions that I thought worked really well for this season in particular. The case itself is really compelling, but it's the characters that surround it that make it that much more interesting for me. So yeah, I really love this one a lot. I really wish more people were talking about it. For True Detective Night Country, I really hope this is a show that pops up a lot within the Emmys this year, because I think it's very much deserving of that. And now, of course, we've made it to the last show we're talking about here. Again, I don't know how long this video is at this point, but I'm very excited to talk about this last show in particular that I just generally was blown away by. Generally might be one of my new favorite shows that I need everybody to just rush out and watch immediately, and that is The Curse. And oh my god, this show. Listen, I will say right off the bat, there are going to be people who definitely are not going to like this show. They're going to think it's too weird, it's too audacious, it's too out there. It goes in some truly bizarre directions that you're not expecting. But that's entirely the point. The whole conceit of this show is to make you feel uncomfortable, is to make you feel uneasy, because that's how these characters are feeling throughout this show. I really can't get into it too much without just telling you, I guess, a basic premise. But basically, we're following this couple. They're involved in this HGTV show that is incredibly problematic. It's super tone deaf. They don't really understand a lot of what it's doing, the negative impact it's having, the gentrification and all these things that they're promoting that they're not realizing they're promoting. They're trying to do what they can to, improve the show and things like that, and make it a little bit more and make it a little bit more favorable and all that stuff. Meanwhile, you also have this character, one of the husband, Asher. He is somebody who, he ends up going up to this girl who is, I believe she has like this lemonade stand, and she asks him for money and he rejects it, and basically she ends up cursing him, and now he's trying to figure out, whether or not this curse is actually real. But once she places this curse, all this weird shit starts to happen, and it is absolutely phenomenal to watch. I mean, one of the things the show just does super well is really just placing you into the characters of both Whitney and Asher, and showing how different these two really are. I mean, Whitney is someone who has such a confidence and an agency to her that it honestly freaks you out, because she is so in control of everybody around her. Everyone, she's constantly, in everyone's orbit. She always has her own way of doing things, and she frequently wants to do them. She frequently has control over basically everything, and Emma Stone just does such a great job of portraying such an unlikable character, but yet bringing this sense of humanity to her that I think a lesser actor just simply couldn't, because you see in Whitney's head, she doesn't see anything she's doing as wrong. She sees it as improving the show. She sees it as, well, these are things I care about and these are things I need to do, but she's actively hurting everybody else around her, and I thought that she just did such a incredible job in the show. But Nathan Fielder, man, oh my god. I mean, listen, I've heard this guy is a true genius when it comes to storytelling. He's done a lot of great documentaries. I watched a couple episodes of his show, The Rehearsal. I don't know why I didn't finish it. I loved what I saw. But he is a revelation in the show, because to my knowledge, he's never, well, yes, he's done, sort of these show within a show type concepts before. Nathan For You, The Rehearsal, which were sort of fictional, but sort of not. He's never really acted in a scripted show like this before. This is really his first foray into doing it. And my God, he holds his own so incredibly well here. I was generally blown away by what he was able to accomplish in this show. The character of Asher is someone that you really don't know how to feel about. He's so socially awkward to the point where he doesn't seem to get along with anybody. There's a great scene in a comedy club where everyone's going around and, making jokes, and his is like the only one that doesn't end up landing. And just moments like that he sells so incredibly well, because you kind of sympathize for the guy. Like, you kind of do see him as somebody that you just want him to finally get it. You want him to finally be able to approach someone and have a conversation with them and be able to, have some kind of genuine rapport. But every time he does, he completely flatlines. He absolutely fails at any social interaction. He doesn't go about anything normally. There's nothing about this guy that seems to work. Everything he attempts seems to fail, but yet you're so compelled by him because of his constant paranoia. He is so concerned about this curse and what's going on around him, and the direction they take his character into is just so incredible to watch. And the way he is pursuing this, and the way they fixate on his character is just so incredibly well handled. But especially in the penultimate and the last episode of the show, I mean, he really gets to showcase his acting muscles in a way that we have not seen him do before, and I just really hope it ends up getting him a bunch of new roles, and it seems like it's going to, because him and Emma Stone are actually going to be reteaming in a movie very soon, and I'm very excited to see what they're both going to do. And then Benny Safdie, also fantastic here. He plays like the worst friend that you could possibly know. He thinks that he's doing the right thing. He's like the worst friend. He's not considerate to anybody. He's very selfish in that way, but yet that's why you find his character so interesting. You always are wondering, what is his true agenda? What does he really want to do? He has this, other sort of, film that he's working on, and you're not entirely sure what that's all about. He's supposed to be Asher's best friend, but yet he rarely treats him as such. And I thought Dougie was just such an interesting character in that way. So I think all of that is really well handled. But the way they portray the relationship between Whitney and Asher is also so fascinating to watch. You see just how incredibly toxic and unpleasant it really is between them. You wonder why these two are really together. And I think the show does a great job of examining that, but also focusing on the dangers of reality TV. This show really just shows how bad, how much that can fuck with somebody's life. And that's exactly what ends up happening to both Asher and Whitney in this show. I mean, the way people are perceiving them and things like that, the reception that this show is having, it's not at all what they are intending it to have, and I think that the show does a really great job with that, yet also having this great sense of very dark humor throughout. There are some very funny moments in the show. It's like pitch black, and it's very subtle, but there were moments where I was laughing pretty hysterically here, and I think that those moments really do land very well in the show. There's one moment particular in the first episode involving a show that Dougie wants to make, and oh my god, it is one of the most genius ideas that I have seen in a very long time. I was laughing hysterically at it, and I think for me that was like one of the biggest hooks as to like, this is going to be such an incredible show. But it's the finale, man. That is what really just won me over with this show, because without getting into it, you think you have an idea of where the show is going to go, and then the finale happens, and you want to talk about just the most batshit insane rug pull of a finale that you will ever see, that just shakes you to your core. Look no further than the finale of The Curse. The last episode of the show generally might be one of my new favorite episodes of TV, just for the reaction it got out of me. Like, I watch a lot of TV. It is very rare that I have the reaction that I did to watching this show. I mean, I was generally so astonished. I could not believe they went in the direction that they did, but yet it felt so right. It was one of those things where I couldn't believe this is what I didn't see happening. I couldn't believe I didn't think the show was going to go in this direction, because they really did set it up so incredibly well here. And I wouldn't even dare tell you what they end up doing, but I will just say it is truly one of the most audacious things I have ever seen a show do. It is such a huge left turn that you are not going to be expecting at any point. But if you understand just how unconventional and weird this show is, it really isn't as shocking in the grand scheme of things. It really does feel like it's going to work, but it really plays into this idea of media exploitation and just how unbothered so many people are by things that they witness. And I think they just perfectly they perfectly coalesce that theme into the show so well, and blended that in a way that I really wasn't expecting them to. The places that they went here, it was so incredibly horrifying to watch, but yet also felt so right for the ending of the show, and it's such a off-kilter, weird direction that it really catches you off guard. But when you really think about it in the general zeitgeist of everything, it feels like it fits right in with all of the ideas that this show really had and what it was really trying to say overall. And I just really applaud Nathan Fielder and Benny Safdie for going to the places that they did in the show and not shying away from being just as weird and out there as this ending really is. There's so many shows I feel like that would shy away from this and would try to kind of tiptoe away from the ideas they go here, but they fully go for it, and it really does deliver in that way. I really just can't recommend this show enough. Just the way it dives into paranoia, anxiety, social, just awkward moments and things like that, just does such a great job with the directions it goes. Not at all what I was expecting. By the end of the show, I mean, it's basically like a David Lynch film in the best way possible. I really can't say how, but I think they just do such a great job with that. And if you really try to understand, what the show has really been commentating on, I mean, it really makes sense with the direction they end up going, but also is like one of the most definitive endings I think I've ever seen. Like, there's no world where this comes back. It just can't. Like, there's no possible way this show can come back. And I can't say why, but just the way they wrap things up, it just feels so perfect. I don't know why anyone would even dare make a second season, just because I think they wrapped this up so perfectly. I think this was just such a fantastic show through and through. There's so much of it that I would love to talk about, but I feel like this is a show that the people that loved it really loved it and definitely got a lot out of it, but there is a large majority of people that have not watched this show, and I really just can't recommend it enough. It really is just something so different and singular that I think you haven't seen before. There's a lot of shows out there that are great. There's very few that achieve the level that this show was able to. This is just one of those kind of shows that just had me so incredibly fixated on just had me so entranced on what was going on at every single second. I loved everything that they were trying to do. It has such incredible performances. It has such interesting ideas and really is just unlike anything I've honestly ever seen before. I literally watched the show like before I was going to bed, and I couldn't sleep. Like, I was thinking about what was going on for like a solid 2 to 3 hours. That's how stunned this finale had me, and only the best shows are really able to fully do that, where it captures your full attention. You don't want to think about anything else. You can't think about anything else, and it's an impossible show to recommend in that way, because it's going to leave you with this sense of shock and awe that you're not really ready for. It's gonna leave you with, the things that happen in this finale just linger with you in a way that you're not expecting it to, but it's such a fantastic payoff all around that I just really can't gush enough about it. This is just easily, I don't know if I'm gonna do a top 10 best shows of the year, but I would be hard pressed to not have this probably in the top 5 at this point, just because of how incredible this show really is. I think it goes without saying at this point, with everything I have said, The Curse absolutely gets an A+. I think out of the shows I have talked about, there's a lot that I really wish more people were watching. This is the one where if you had to ask me right now, what is the one show that I need to watch that I'm not watching? It's The Curse. And like I said, you might turn it off within the first 10 minutes, and that's okay if you do. I don't really have a problem with that, but I think you at least need to give this a watch, because if you are able to enjoy it to the level that I did, it is generally going to be one of the most game-changing and just it is generally going to be one of the most captivating, introspective, human, and just masterful things you have seen on TV in a very long time. There are very few shows that achieve what this show is able to and pull off the big swings that this show did, especially in the last episode. I can't believe they pulled off what they did, but because they fully commit to it, I think that's why this show works as well as it does. So yeah, really just can't recommend this one enough, but also absolutely impossible to recommend at the same time. All right, well, that video was probably a lot longer than I anticipated it to be, but I'm very happy that I did this. Like I said, I really do recommend you guys checking out all these shows. Even Death and Other Details, wasn't big on that one, but was still, think that, it's definitely worth watching. Very excited to get back into reviewing TV shows again. It's been a while. I'm excited to finally, get back into it. There's a lot of TV seasons I have watched since talking about the shows on this list. I will say that right now there's a lot lot of TV seasons I've watched. This is the most TV I've watched in a very long time. So I am very excited to get to talk about the seasons individually that I have watched, some of which you've heard about, some of which you maybe haven't. So I'm very excited to dive into all of that. Also look forward to other reviews I'm going to be doing for sure. Lots of catching up to do on the movie and TV side of things. So you can look forward to all of that. But either way, guys, for this video, hope you guys enjoyed it. We'll see you guys in my next video. And if you have seen any of these shows, as always, comment down below, let me know what you guys thought of any of them. Would love to hear your thoughts on all that. That's it for this video. Hope you guys enjoyed it. We'll see you guys in my next video, and we'll see you guys for that. Okay, bye.